Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the November Sequelisers live stream. I am your host, as always, Jack Chambers, and joining me is Mr. Tim Mayton, my fellow Sequelizer. How are you, Tim?
I'm all right. How are you, Jack?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. It's weird doing this at 5 o'clock on a Sunday. We usually do it at 6 o'clock on a Saturday, and I'd kind of gotten into that rhythm. But now we're on a little
Your
bit
whole
different
week's
time
going to be
schedule.
off now.
I know, yeah. My camera's slightly off angle as well. I don't know what's going on. You may also notice we're missing a certain filmmaker and director colleague of ours, but he has been replaced by another filmmaker and director friend of ours, our special guest, Mr. Reece Lipman. Hello, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thank you very much. How you guys doing?
Good, yeah. Excited
Good,
to talk some Edgar Wright with you, sir. I'm excited.
Yeah.
That was an excellent choice from yourself.
Thank you. Well, long-time listener, first-time caller, so I thought I'd get in there pretty strongly.
The classic. Nice. For those of the listeners who don't know you, Reece, straight away, tell us a little bit about yourself. I introduced you as filmmaker, a director. You're also a writer. Tell basically your kind of history with film, how you started in your career, basically. Just a quick rundown of the last 20, 30 years or so.
Yeah, easy. So I'm Reece. I am as Jack said, I'm a filmmaker, writer, director, editor. I have been I've been working there for about kind of 10, 12 years or so. I started off doing script reading stuff in a production company in London, and have since gone on to do videography work for about 5 or 6 years in-house at a production company, and now I'm freelance and doing my own stuff. I have done everything from music videos to lots of documentaries, obviously corporate work because that pays the bills, but then also making my own short films and web series and things. I have had some kind of crazy experiences doing things. I did some filming on Buckingham Palace roof at one point, which was pretty crazy.
No big deal. Just Buckingham Palace roof, yeah.
Just on the roof. Yeah, just on the roof. I have interviewed David Attenborough twice, which has been
holy shit
highlights.
I saw that in your show reel, actually. I did wonder how much actual interaction you had with Sir David Attenborough. How was he in real life? Is he as much of a delight as you think he might be?
So it's really interesting. So I've done it twice, and the very first time I did it, I was so nervous that I was physically shaking before I met him. And then we started talking. So we were doing a video about endangered animals, and kind of for the Royal Society, for the science kind of body, the Royal Society, of which he's a patron, I believe. And we kind of sat down and we started doing the interview, and it was quite clear that he wasn't really sure about the answers to some of the questions. And it turned out he hadn't really been briefed about what we were going to be speaking about. And then he kind of said, which is very true, he said, the thing is, I go where the animals are, not where they aren't. So I don't know that much about the endangered. So I then had to, on the fly, terrified, rework all of the questions to get content for this video, and it kind of worked. The second time was I was doing, a few years ago, the British Library had a massive exhibit about Captain James Cook, and the kind of the Western discovery of Australia, and the Cook's voyages. And so Sir David Attenborough is kind of an expert on part of those voyages, so we did an interview with him about that, and that was excellent because he knew all the answers, was kind of incredibly articulate about talking about it. And then you're talking, and the whole time I've got the headphones on behind the camera, just being like, "Oh, it's David Attenborough. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy." And he was lovely, and we got a picture with him and stuff afterwards. So that was a lot of fun. That was a big highlight. I've directed Bill Nye in a tour of his favourite London gallery. And that was a lot of fun because I was specific.
Yeah, again, totally normal. Bill Nye's favourite gallery, That
was a lot of fun because that was one that I was specifically told beforehand to not talk about Doctor Who or Edgar Wright with him. I was specifically all of my colleagues.
Don't call him Philip.
Don't talk about Edgar Wright. Don't talk about Doctor Who. I was like, all right, fine. I won't. And I was coming back after setting up a shot, and I was like, okay, Bill, we're ready for you. And as I got him back, the people from the gallery were talking to him about his bit in Doctor Who, because we were filming Van Gogh painting. So he was talking about that. I was like, you guys are allowed to talk about it. I'm not allowed to talk about it. This is not fair. But he was a delight. He is absolutely lovely. And I remember thinking at the time, how crazy it was, because he he was incredibly kind, because at the very beginning of the shoot, he could see I was quite nervous directing him, and he said, oh, because I was like, he did a take, and I thought, okay, like I want to do it slightly differently, and I was kind of stumbling a little bit. He goes, oh no, it's fine, tell me what you want, just tell me what you need, and I'll do it. And I just remember thinking like how amazing that was. He could see I was nervous. I was like, you're directing it, I see control.
That's a pro right there. That is a guy who's been doing it for decades. Yeah.
Yeah, that was delightful. And it was just that thought of, oh my god, like he's been directed by Edgar Wright, he's been directed by some of my lots of my heroes, and this is absolutely crazy that I am now doing that. So that was wonderful. Yes, and then I make short films. So I've been up to your Fair City in Norwich recently for a couple of times, because a film of mine called Ice Cream and Donuts just played at the Norwich Film Festival. And was nominated for Best East Anglian Film while I was up there, which was lovely. We had a really good time at the award ceremony, and we had a really good, just a really great time at the festival. So it's been lovely, yeah. And that's stuff that I do.
Amazing. And now you're stuck here with us.
And now I'm talking to you, fine fellas.
Cool.
And
We've got
is
some.
Ice Cream and Ice Cream and Donuts available if people want to watch it anywhere? Is that available to the public yet, or is it still?
So it is the 28th of November. So for another 2 days until the 30th of November, you can watch it on the Norwich Film Festival website. I think it's like about £3 or something like that, and you can watch like a series of films, or I think it's £15, and you can watch the whole thing. So it's available on there till the 30th of November, and at the moment it's not available anywhere else. You can see the trailer up on YouTube, up on my website and stuff. But the actual film will kind of wait until the end of the festival run before we put it up, because we've still got quite a few festivals to come in. So we hope to play it some more.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely stick the links up to that so people can watch the trailer and appreciate. I have seen it, and it is excellent.
Thank you.
Working with some really talented young actors, and some beautiful shots of what is it? Is it Southend Pier? I forget.
Worthing.
It's not Chroma.
Yeah. It's not Chroma. It's not Chroma. It's not Southend. Sadly, it was Worthing Pier. Which is
yes.
Nice.
Great. Yeah.
Well, I've just pinged the link to that in the chat, so live viewers, and if you're catching up on YouTube, feel free to click the link. Check. I will add it to the description as well. So if you are catching up on VOD, you can check it out on YouTube there as well. We have got a few of our regulars showing up in the chat. Of course, Xenos is here, and unbelievably, Xenos has actually seen some films that we will be talking about today. Usually, Xenos has seen 1, maybe 0. But unbelievably, he has seen upwards of 2 of the films.
My God.
Spoiler alert, there's 8 of them. So that's like a quarter. That's like a new record for Xenos, I think. At this point.
That's a high hit rate for Xenos.
A fellow local man, Mr. Jonathan Firth Clark, there he is in the chat as well. Tyler, another regular of ours. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I think it's going to be an interesting one because... we've tackled Spielberg, we've tackled Del Toro and stuff like that, but you kind of hinted at it there, Reece. I'm wondering if you kind of already answered the question, is why pick Edgar Wright? Like, is he pretty much a filmmaking hero of yours? Is he a big inspiration for you growing up as a young kind of writer and creator and stuff?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I spoke to Tim about kind of joining you guys and about the choice for this month, I struggled to work out we went through a few different directors, and part of it was that some directors I was thinking about, they had way too many films that I could go through. So people like Richard Linklater and stuff like that we looked at, who've been made that mistake before. Yeah. It's like Richard Linklater was a massive influence on me growing up, and actually in Ice Cream and Donuts, like an awful lot of that is Richard Linklater inspired. But Edgar Wright is someone who's been his work I've obviously followed incredibly closely ever since Shaun of the Dead came out. I remember buying Shaun of the Dead on DVD, having never seen it, being enticed by the. Do you remember when it came out? It had posters up in phone boxes that just said "Rom Zom Com," and I just thought, oh, that looks really cool. I don't know what it is, but that interests me. Absolutely fell in love with it, and from that point onwards, absolutely fell in love with his films. Now, I also preface this by saying I understand he gets a lot of criticism for things, and he is not a perfect filmmaker. That I absolutely know. We would discuss later on. There's many issues I have with many of his films, and there are caveats that go along with an awful lot of my opinions about his films. However, I think that I love his sense of editing. I love the way he directs action. Even though I myself am not an action kind of director, I love the pace. I think when it comes to pacing and style, there are few directors working today who can do what Edgar Wright does, and do it as well as he does it. And I think that at the heart of it is what I've always loved when it comes to writing. There are sort of Edgar Wrighty motifs I kind of have in the back of my brain, again, but more to do with pacing than anything else. And I think that he is someone who is eminently watchable. Like even people who don't really like his films aren't going to be like, it's not that I didn't enjoy it, it's that I didn't like certain elements of it, but there's something quite enjoyable. And that goes back to Spaced as well. Even though, like, I don't know about you guys, I didn't get Spaced when I was younger. I tried watching it when I was a teenager.
I
didn't get
loved Spaced. I absolutely fucking loved it.
Yeah,
it was only when
Spaced was like a religion to me. Like, I watched it when it was first coming out on Channel 4. Just, I think, because it was on after Friends, and so because I didn't have a life, I was always in on a Friday night, and it was like Friends and then Spaced, and it's such a whiplash in tone where you've got this like polished American like glamorous lifestyle, and then Spaced where it's like crammed in a tiny bed set and everyone's smoking.
Yeah, I didn't get it until I finished uni and was unemployed. Like I finished uni, I was unemployed, and my first paycheck I bought a PS3.
Nice.
So that I could play a game, but also so that I could buy Back to the Future on Blu-ray that had just come out. And then I just had like no job and was just kind of working a few hours a week. And I started watching Spaced because it was on. It must have been on 4OD or something at the time.
Yeah, it was on 4. Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, I get it. I'm them. Right, I got it. Fine. And then from that point onwards, love it.
I feel like we always talk about how, and I'm sure this is the same for you as well, Reece, like Jack and I, to a certain extent, like we've seen a lot of films first on The Simpsons by them doing parodies of stuff and references, and then you see a film and you go, oh, that's what that joke was about.
100%, yeah.
And I'm exactly the same with Spaced, because I was watching it when I was like a little bit too young for it, probably.
Same here. Yep.
I then have seen films later and gone like, oh, that's what that's a reference to. Oh, it's a whole joke about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like...
Yeah,
nice.
We rewatched it actually, my partner and I, a couple of months ago, because she had never seen it. So we rewatched it kind of, I think it must have been turn of the year, middle of the pandemic, and she'd never seen it, and it still holds up. Like, it still just really does hold up well, even after all these years.
I'm sure we'll get into his stats as we go through the films, but interestingly, on Rotten Tomatoes, Spaced has 100% rating.
It does indeed.
Wow.
Project.
I noticed that earlier as well, so I was very pleasantly surprised by that. And weirdly enough, I saw Jessica Hines in the pub round the corner from me about a year or so ago. There's this weird moment of like, I'm not gonna be that guy. She's just chilling with her friends. I'm not gonna be that guy. I'd be like, oh my god, I love Space. I love Shaun of the Dead. You're awesome. But yeah, she's fairly local, I think, or at least has friends or family up here because she's quite like regularly around. And I know people who have met her in Norwich and stuff. So yeah, if you're ever around the Playhouse in Norwich, then yeah.
she was one of the judges that was on the Norwich Film Festival judging panel this year.
That makes sense.
Watching our films, so that was one of my things of like, oh my god, Jessica Hines is going to watch the film. Like, that's so cool.
And for those of you in the chat who do have any questions, Matt is ill, unfortunately. I know I didn't address that at the beginning. I did just kind of tease that he's been replaced. We've basically been recording a lot recently. He's got filming coming up for Super Happy Kill Time. We've been doing a lot of like double records and stuff like that. He's been a busy boy. He's also started his new job, all that kind of stuff, and he is just worn down and been ill for like 2 or 3 weeks now. He needed the break because we've got podcast stuff coming up and we kind of had to prioritize that. So yeah, Matt bowed out this one as a kind of precautionary, and he also had loads of internet trouble as well, which is a whole other issue that I know nothing about. So we won't address that.
If you hear coughing in the back of recent episodes on the podcast, that's Matt struggling through a pretty nasty winter cold.
Yeah, we had to establish new hand signals. Usually we have like I'd like to speak next kind of hand signal when we're in the room with each other. But Matt has done a full like, I need to cough now, like hand over waving in front of us, and then we'll just go.
Yeah.
die in the corner and then come back. So yeah, that's been interesting, and I appreciate Matt powering through it. Matt, I hope you do watch this. I don't know if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, please do send your love to Matt on Twitter. He is. Hold on, I've still got the banner for his thing, even though he's not here. He is Stogs on Twitter. Go and send him some love. Go and wish him well and all that kind of stuff.
If he showed up in the chat at some point, but I also know he's under the weather. He's got a lot on his plate at the moment. So
he's also editing an episode, I believe, at the moment. So like mid edit, and also very ill, and literally just sent me a script for something we're filming tomorrow a few minutes ago. So he's a busy boy, bless him, as he always is. Let's have a look. Well, we got some live chat stuff coming in. Most people doing Hot Fuzz references, pretty much. It's Midsummer Murders on Coke. I mean, kind of, Kieran. Yeah, you're not
pretty
wrong.
much.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a pretty much universal. We have a quick little. I don't know if this is. Oh, do we reveal this already, Reece? There's a reference to what you're wearing. Is that Kim Pine t-shirt? Is your bias showing already?
This is where is it?
Amazing.
So that was one of the first. So the first year my girlfriend and I were together, this was what she bought me for my birthday, and we went to see Scott Pilgrim. They're playing a 35mm print showing, I believe, at the Prince Charles in London. So we went to the Natural History Museum to look at dinosaurs, and then went to watch that in the evening. That's a great birthday.
Amazing.
That is a very good birthday.
A friend of mine met Brian Lee O'Malley a few years ago and went to like a signing of his up north and got all that Scott Pilgrim and a few other of his books signed and stuff. I was so very, very jealous because I know we'll get into this obviously later on, but to touch on the comics of Scott Pilgrim, like I remember I think I got into them after like the second or third volume. So I was there for that moment where the finale hadn't come out, but the movie was coming out and there was a video game coming out. And they all have completely different endings because they're all essentially made independently of each other. And it's like, which ending do you prefer? Which one's canon? Doesn't fucking matter. Whatever you like. I was like, I can kind of respect that. That's an interesting way of doing it. Rather than having the kind of typical bullshit, slocky movie tie-in video game stuff that we get so often. You know, like the Batman Begins video game. Like, oh, God. Get shit like that. It was actually like a really cool... kind of 16-bit arcadey beat 'em up kind of thing that was recently re-released, funny enough, because it was unavailable for years and years and years, and now it's been recently re-released, and it's fantastic. If you haven't played Scott Pilgrim the game, I highly recommend it. It is a lot of fun, and has one of the best soundtracks by a band called Anamanaguchi, which are just the best like chiptune band ever.
And it's in that game. That was actually one of the first games I bought on that PS3 that I bought at the same time I was watching Spaced. And I just remember it being like, it's such a hard game as well. It's so kind of like, it really wears its kind of early 90s influences on its sleeve, that game, which means that it's also cripplingly difficult at points. I don't think I ever completed it. I think I got to the Katanagi twins and I was like, I just can't do any more of this. This is just impossible. So I was a bit different with the Scott Pilgrim books in that I had heard of them, but then I had never read them, but I knew that Edgar Wright was working on this film about it, and obviously at that point I really loved Edgar Wright, and it was the end of my third year of uni, and we were up at the Edinburgh Fringe doing a comedy show, and I remember I think I'd bought a couple of them just before we went up there. And then the sixth one was released. So I went to the Waterstones in Edinburgh and just bought like the rest of the 4 books. And I think I finished reading the 6th one the day or so before the film came out. Like I properly binged through them. I thought it was just because I was utterly hooked.
I did the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Tim, have you read the Scott Pilgrim books?
Yes, yeah.
Nice.
I got into them. It was between the second and third coming out. And so... got really into them. I remember the quote that got I was on comic boards back in the day of message boards, and so the quote that persuaded me to pick it up was Scott Pilgrim is the best thing to happen to comics since comics happened to themselves.
Nice.
I picked up the first 2 and was just obsessed with them because Edgar Wright's such a good match for them, I think, because they both have that kind of drenched in pop culture sensibility. And yeah, I really loved the books, and actually I got to see Brian Lee O'Malley at a signing when I was in America.
Oh, cool!
Got a sketch by him, which was awesome, and yeah, in fact, so my girlfriend at the time had dressed up as Ramona for Halloween, I think that year.
Special request from Tim. We understand. Tim. We know what you're doing. You old dirty dog.
And we both really enjoyed the Scott Pilgrim comics, and Brian Lee O'Malley had like a message board thing at the time, and she posted a picture of it, and later got told that Edgar Wright had seen that picture during the production as like an example of like here's some of the people who've dressed up as Ramona, like here's what the look looks like in real life.
Wow.
So
Wow.
That was a very cool moment. And also I was wearing a t-shirt at the time when I met him, and he said like, "Oh, I really like your t-shirt." I was like, "Oh, thanks. Please sign." And then a couple of volumes later, another character was wearing the same t-shirt, and he said that he was like drawing it at the time and decided to put it in based on someone he met at that comic signing. I was like, "That's me. That's my torso is in this book."
Amazing.
So your girlfriend at the time
How did I not know that?
Inspired the movie, and you're in the comic. That's insane.
Yeah.
So no bias here, right, guys?
Absolutely not.
No. I think it gets very. I think like we'll talk about it like I guess in a bit, but I think it gets very difficult when you get to. I think the bad Edgar Wright films are obvious, and I think it gets really difficult when you get to the good ones, because I think there is a weird jump in quality in his films between the second-rate ones and the top tier. And the top tier are like some of the best British films ever made, as far as I'm concerned, and the bottom tier I could do without watching ever again. Like it's just a really weird split in them.
Weirdly enough, we were having this conversation in our little group chat on Twitter, and you and I seem to be on a very similar wavelength there, Reece. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. Some of the best British films I've made, and then if I never watch them again, it's fine. I'm like, yep, that pretty much sums up my experience as well. I know certain people, a friend of mine, who I think I've brought him up on the show before, absolutely loves The World's End for some reason. It's not only his favorite Cornetto trilogy movie, it's not only his favorite Edgar Wright movie, it's one of his favorite films of all time. And I'm like, okay, like, are you messing with me? Because I couldn't get my head around it. And then he got a fucking World's End tattoo, and I'm like, oh, you're not kidding around. Okay, this is deadly serious. Like, you're really, really passionate about that film. Like, fair enough. He's American as well. And I was like, weird. I feel like that's an incredibly British film, but like, okay, fair enough.
That's so weird. Like it's because I saw a ranking because I've been doing some research for this. And I actually saw a ranking on another website yesterday that had listed World's End as the second best Edgar Wright film, and I was like, really? Like, it's fine. It's fine. And on I guess we'll discuss more about it later on. But in subsequent viewings, I liked it a lot the first time I saw it. In subsequent viewings, they kind of less so. And then the more I watched, I was like, actually, you know what? There's an awful lot going on here. I do think it's really good in different ways. But the second best, that was confusing to me in so many ways. Yeah.
Very strange.
But we always say every film is someone's favorite film, no matter how bad
it is.
So
that's true.
We're on a podcast about bad sequels, and pretty much every episode we'll get somebody being like, I love Spider-Man 3. Like, really? Yeah. Highlander 2, The Quickening is my favourite movie of all time. It's like, no, it's not. You're just saying that to be cool. And rose-tinted nostalgia glasses.
Yeah, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. I mean...
Oh, God, yeah. We'll get into that, but spoiler alert: The World's End is not going to fucking win this bracket. I'll let you know that at the top right now. If you're
going to move my light a little bit closer. I'm a bit dark. Sorry, I'm not running away. There we go.
Chandler, if you are watching, which I know he does sometimes and does listen to the podcast, No, the World's End is not winning, and I apologise, but I respect your dedication. In fact, I might have a photo of his tattoo on my phone actually, because he sent it to me, and my mind was so boggled. He was like, I specifically have to send this to you to let you know, and it is never stopped.
Well, the thing is, like, because I remember you talking about this, and it's not even like the Gary King tattoo that he's got, is it? Which would be the natural. You would assume that if you're gonna get a tattoo from a film, you'd get the tattoo that the main character has.
Yeah,
it's a blank or something like that. I'll see if I can find it, because I can find it on his Twitter maybe. But yeah, it's an interesting choice. Very interesting. I mean,
it does feature one of my favourite lines in an Edgar Wright film, though, which is we can swear on this. How bad can we go on the swearing on this? But it's at the end.
Go as nuts as you want. We don't make money from this. So monetization is nothing. So that's fine.
It's just at the end of it where where the Bill Nye character kind of is the voice of God, and Gary King just really drunk is, "Oh, fuck off back to Legoland, you cunt," which I think is hilarious when he says it. It's just funny.
I have found it. I'm just pinging it through to myself on here, see if I can find it. Because good lord, it's an interesting thing. Got some live chats coming in as well. World's End is going to lose out to Tintin. Tintin, he did not direct, by the way, just for the record. So that is not in the bracket. We have a bracket of 8 movies, all of which he directed, for the record.
Yes, we're not including Ant-Man, which he has
no
some credits on because he
producer credit in the end, wasn't it?
I think co-writer and exec producer. I believe.
Yeah. Did he not get story by credit on that as well?
Possibly, yeah. Something to do with the writing. Yeah.
Well, they're interesting. I always liked was it an interview with Peyton Reed I heard about Ant-Man, that the bit that is the most Edgar Wright-y in Ant-Man was a Peyton Reed thing, not an Edgar Wright thing, which I thought was hilarious.
Yes, the Cure playing on the iPhone.
The Michael Pena bit where it's like, I spoke to them, who spoke to them. I thought that's Edgar Wright. That's clearly been left in. And Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish, that's got them written all over it. But no, apparently that wasn't one of his bits, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Are you ready to see my friend Chandler's World's End tattoo? Because you're going to be
ready.
like,
so ready.
There you go.
Wow.
Interesting. The big robot thing.
Thing.
Yeah.
On the back of his calf.
The Gort motherfucker.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
A deep cut. That is a deep reference.
Right? I was like, oh yeah, well, like, as you said to him, it's going to be the Gary tattoo. Like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Or that it's going to be like the World's End pub like sign or something like that. Something.
Yeah.
Nope. Just a big old robot dude. Okay, fair enough. I'm sure he's going to hate me for sharing that on the live stream, but oh well. It's publicly available on Twitter. I'm not breaching any confidentiality things. He's got a tattoo. It's fine. But yeah, it is truly bizarre. I know there is. I feel like there's a fairly reasonable consensus about a lot of people with Edgar Wright movies, and then as you said, Reece, it gets really, really difficult once you're narrowing it down to like the top 3 or so.
Yeah.
But I do know a few people who really love the other stuff, and I just don't get, or I just didn't care about, or whatever. I think it's he's an interesting director. I'm looking forward. We will get to him in a moment. Don't worry, listeners, and viewers. Quick question for you, Reece: is that a Carter Johnson art mug? What is on your mug, good sir?
I actually have no idea. Again, this is another present from my girlfriend. She just buys me cool shit.
Nice.
This is so I've got one that says "I know" with Han Solo on it, and she's got a little Princess Leia that says "I love you" on it. Those were as a Christmas present from her a couple of years ago. So we each have our own Star Wars mug.
Is that the artwork from the Darth Vader and Son series that looks like it is? Looks very similar to that.
No, because that is Jeffrey Brown.
That's Jeffrey Brown, yeah.
Yeah, that's not the same. Because Jeffrey Brown, I love. By the way, if no one's read Jeffrey Brown's comic books, they just know them from the Star Wars and Friends stuff, who never read his comic books, oh my god, those things broke me. They are incredible pieces of work. And I was talking about Edgar Wright. Wow, they're good.
To his Star Wars.
Very different. But some of this beautiful writing. They're amazing. If no one's read those, I can't remember. Was this a little? I can't remember what they're called. Oh, check him out, Jeffrey Brown.
Unlikely is that one?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
a confused life or something like that. I read them about the same time. Yes.
Undeleted scenes. I'm just looking at a list now. I'm cheating. Unlikely is one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Unlikely is beautiful. But I read those about the same time I read Scott Pilgrim, so I was in my kind of like
your cool indie comics phase.
My
right?
cool indie comics being single and depressed phase. Yeah.
Yeah. We've all been there. We know it. We know it well. Cool. So, shall we dive into the brackets, gentlemen? Should we get it up?
Let's do it.
And see what we can find, right? So let's swap around to that. And then I'm controlling it this time, viewers, if you haven't seen this before. So I apologize in advance. I've got a second screen over here that this is sharing. So I apologize in advance if I can't work it properly. It's my first time doing this on the live stream. Hopefully, there we go. We can zoom in. So I'll lay everything out real quick before we get into actually making decisions and stuff. So our first pick is going to be the Sparks Brothers versus A Fistful of Fingers. A very interesting pairing there. Very, very recent. And then Edgar Wright's first movie. Mm-hmm. Then Baby Driver versus Scott Pilgrim versus The World. And then on the other side, like I said, just 8 films for this one. Shaun of the Dead versus The World's End. And of course, Hot Fuzz and his most recent release, which is Last Night in Soho.
Still in cinemas.
Currently still in cinemas,
some places.
Yeah. So we'll be very careful about how we speak about that. Because I've seen it. Tim, you've seen it as well, yeah?
I have seen it, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I have not.
So we won't spoil it. But we will talk. I've got some opinions on it that I feel like I'm interested to hear. I'm interested to hear what Tim has to say about it as well. But yeah.
We'll keep it as spoiler free as we can, folks. Don't worry.
The really difficult one for me here is Baby Driver versus Scott Pilgrim versus Scott Pilgrim versus The World. That's hard. Like, of all of the rest of them, I feel like for me there's a pretty clear choice. Those two, I know I'm wearing a Scott Pilgrim shirt and have professed my love for Scott Pilgrim, but that is a difficult category.
Interesting. We'll get into that in a moment. For those of you who are new or watching for the first time or catching up on YouTube or whatever you're doing, these are seeded, so these are ranked by their IMDb rating as we go through. We haven't just randomly pinged them all out and stuff like that. So, we're going for highest rated, lowest rated, all that kind of stuff. And of course, it's Sequelisers, so we're going to talk about Rotten Tomatoes as well. I've got the Edgar Wright's Rotten Tomatoes page here on my phone ready to go, so we'll be going through that and discussing budgets, box offices, all the usual stuff we talk about on here as we go through as well. Some people are already making picks, by the way. The fact that you've just mentioned Scott Pilgrim versus Baby Driver being the most difficult there. John says Scott Pilgrim beats Baby Driver hands down. Well, fair enough.
Fair. Completely fair.
Already picking Hot Fuzz. A lot of predictions for Scott Pilgrim versus Hot Fuzz as a finale. So, yeah.
Well, interesting.
Viewers out there, please do let us know your predictions for the final 2, because that is always a very interesting prediction. I think I have an idea. I ran through it myself earlier, as I often do, not just to test the technology itself, but also to be like, if I was just God in this universe, what would I pick? What would be my favorite pick? So, I'm intrigued. Any predictions for finales, the last 2, gentlemen?
I feel like I'd be giving mine away if I give it.
I feel like Scott
well, we might stop you, Reece. It's not like your final say.
I feel like Scott Pilgrim has a pretty strong route to the final.
Yeah.
I think the other side is trickier, but we shall see.
Yeah,
we have Matt's choices on record, so we may factor him in, and of course we also, in the cases of draws, pivot to the audience. So be prepared. We may be calling on you in the live stream.
Yeah, cause I do agree. I think it's that thing of I think Scott Pilgrim's got the easier run in there, but because I think the way we kind of said with the difference between the top tier and the bottom tier of Edgar Wright films is that Scott Pilgrim's fallen on that cat side, but the other side, I mean, for me, two of those could win, and I would be okay with either. Like, there's basically 3 or 4 films here that could win, and I'd kind of be fine with any of them winning. I think a lot of it depends on what other people, because I find it difficult to pick what my favorite one would be. It changes depending on my mood.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna have to do it by the end of tonight.
I have. Yeah, I have.
I've got it.
You're gonna have to.
I've been analysing over the last couple of days. I've got it in my brain.
Okay. Again, another Scott Pilgrim versus Hot Fuzz prediction. Prediction of Hot Fuzz being the overall winner there from Phil.
Wow.
Scott Pilgrim versus Sean. Interesting. A slight divergence there from John. Yeah, interesting. I love Shaun of the Dead, but Hot Fuzz is better. I think that's quite a common opinion I've heard from some people.
Yeah.
So very interesting. Shall we get into it, gents? Shall we get stuck in?
Let's
Go for it.
Right. So we're kicking off with 2021's The Sparks Brothers, which is a very interesting film. We'll get into that in a second. I'll start off with the Rotten Tomatoes stuff, of course. Hold on, let me get my... Like I said, I'm doing it on my phone. I apologize if I'm a bit slower than usual. Starting off with the highest rated of everything, which is interesting. As I said, it is a 2021 music documentary. It's 2 hours and 50 minutes long, 95% on the tomatometer. And for those of you who are new, the tomatometer is a bit of a weird scale. That is the percentage of positive reviews, which is a 6 out of 10 or a 3 out of 5 or a 60%, however you want to word that 6 out of 10 equivalent. 95% of the reviewers gave it a 6 out of 10 or more is essentially how that works. Out of 155 reviews from the critics, and only 100 to 200 reviews from the audience side of things, but even higher at 98% for the Sparks Brothers. So that is, I will let you know now, that is the highest rated of all of them by not a significant way, but the consensus being across both audience and critics is like, yeah, higher than anything else. And then we come over to 1995's A Fistful of Fingers, which is half the length of that, just over an hour and 15 minutes long, and no tomatometer score. So a big fat nothing, and an audience score of 55%. So yeah. Let's start off with, I guess it's a weird place to start with Edgar Wright's career, but let's start with Sparks Brothers. Have we all seen Sparks Brothers? Let's just start off.
Yes.
I have.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool. I have as well. Excellent. I know Reece and I, when we did a little tech test before we came live, we've been like trying to binge watch the ones we hadn't seen over the last few days. So
yeah,
like,
same here.
Okay, good. We're all in the same boat that we watched it a few days ago probably, and been catching up ever since. But yeah, it's a weird one because it's a documentary, and Sparks is a band I'm familiar with through my mum, weirdly enough. She absolutely loves This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us, like one of her absolute favorite songs. And we had this weird bonding moment. There was a radio host many years ago in the UK called John Peel, who would do this like really kind of eclectic, weird, undiscovered bands, all this kind of stuff, music show. And it was how a lot of bands kind of got discovered back in the day. And I will try to find the name of the band, actually. There was a heavy metal cover of This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us. And I had just gotten into heavy metal as a kid. And my mum was kind of like, what the hell is this? And John Peel was just doing his usual, and coming up next, we've got a heavy metal cover of Sparks, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. And here we go. And it starts off the same, very quiet and stuff. And then it turns into like Swedish death metal. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. All that kind of stuff. And my mum and I were just like headbanging, driving to the coast somewhere in Norfolk, just like having this bonding moment. So I'm not a huge Sparks fan, but I have that kind of moment where that song is so like lodged in my brain. And I knew nothing about them, basically going in. And I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I think it's a really interesting piece of filmmaking. And I was like, how the fuck do you get an Edgar Wright documentary? My brain can't even, like you were saying earlier, Reece, he's got such a distinctive style, the way he shoots his action, and particularly his editing and stuff has now become one of his signature pieces. I was like, how does that translate? How does the guy who did Shaun of the Dead and Baby Driver make a documentary? Turns out he makes it really fucking well.
Yeah, I think I didn't know Sparks at all until I think the first time weirdly I ever heard of Sparks was when they did the collaboration with Franz Ferdinand a few years ago, the FFS collaboration. And it was like, oh, Franz Ferdinand doing a collaboration with Sparks. I was like, who the hell are Sparks? And I was so weird that I'd never, because they're the kind of band that I feel like I would have heard of at some point, but just never had heard of them. So for me, this was a whole. I went in kind of cold. I didn't really know any of the songs, didn't know anything, and I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, I was listening to them all day yesterday, actually. Just getting into it. There's some stuff there that I absolutely love now. I think it's brilliant. I think Number One Song in Heaven is completely my kind of jam. And I think that it's a really interesting documentary. I think it's too long. I
agree.
Too long at 2 hours 15. Yeah. I think I do get the Edgar Wrightiness of it, because I think Sparks in their music have got the same kind of irreverence and the same kind of style as Edgar Wright does in his films. It's in the way they kind of do the opposite thing to what you might expect a lot of the time. I feel like the documentary definitely has that in there. The documentary throws everything at the wall. It throws animation, it throws all kinds of different weird stuff. I think the talking heads are always really interesting and funny. I think the way it's edited has got a real Edgar Wright pace to it. So it does move forward, but it is too long. And I whilst I really enjoyed it, I did have a problem with it. Basically just goes through every single album, and I was like, during the mid 80s section, I kind of felt myself waning a little bit and being like, okay, then
did the rest of the world. Yeah.
It was just like, and then they released another album, and then this happened with it. It's like, cool, but surely there's more. And it kind of skips over the period of 6 years where they did nothing and everyone was quite depressed. And I was like, I mean, there's got to be a bigger story in there. What's the narrative was just they released an album, and I was like, okay, but 6 years they didn't do anything. They're working on stuff that failed, and whilst they do kind of touch on it, I think they could have gone a bit more into then. But for a Friday evening at home with a beer, I've had a great time with it. I really enjoyed it, and I've got a new band now to explore.
Nice. I did just drop the link to there's a band called Theory in Practice, and I always remember the album name because it's called Colonizing the Sun, and I remember John Peel being like, that's Theory in Practice there from Colonizing the Sun. It doesn't sound like a particularly good idea to me, but each their own. And I just remember that line of some Colonizing the Sun.
John Peel.
Yeah, exactly. For those of you in the chat, go and check out a heavy metal cover of a Sparks song, because it's kind of terrible but kind of amazing. Tim, what about you with your history of Sparks and the documentary and stuff?
Yeah, so I was aware of Sparks. I have 1 or 2 of their albums, I think. I've got a friend who's really into them, and so he had introduced me to Sparks a few years ago. I'd kind of heard...
I feel like they're one of those bands, right? I don't know anyone who's really into Sparks, but I know people who are really into Sparks.
Yeah, I'd heard This Town Ain't Big Enough for the both of us as just kind of hearing it on the radio growing up and stuff like that, but not really thinking to go who are this band. Basically, it was just a song that I heard, and then the album I know I have is Little Beethoven, which was their 2002 album, which kind of was the start of a kind of critical reappraisal of them, and it's a really good album. And so I knew some of their songs going in, but they are an incredibly prolific band that took 25 albums, and I think the documentary it almost makes the same mistake that a lot of music biopics make, where it's we're going to tell you about this band's entire life. Sparks has to think about their entire life before they go on stage, kind of thing. And I think there's some really interesting through lines in the film about their love of cinema and stuff like that, and the way that they tried to collaborate with various different filmmakers through their career. They almost did a film with Tim Burton that was an anime adaptation that then fell through, and stuff like that. And then they finally this year they wrote and did the music for Annette, which is I forget the name of he's the filmmaker behind Holy Motors. I can't remember his name, but it's an Adam Driver.
Leos Carax.
There we go. Adam Driver and Marianne Cotillard, and it's been very acclaimed and looks completely insane, as you would expect, from the collaboration of those two people. And I think you could have almost got a better documentary by just focusing on that thread, because like the others have said, it's kind of too long. It's very impressive in how thorough it is, and like it's got some really great archival footage, and I think there's some really fun editing, especially like in the earlier periods when there's not archival footage. They do some really interesting stuff.
The animated stuff is really interesting.
All the animated stuff's really good. The talking heads, it's got such a huge like range of musicians in there, and comedians and like filmmakers and stuff like that who are just like, oh yeah, I love Sparks, and you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think it does drag a little bit. I think even if they'd have just kind of, because they're a band they've had really moments of really high popularity, and then they've gone away for a bit where things didn't work, or they've completely changed what they're doing, and then they've come back, and then they've gone away, and then they've come back, and almost like if they'd have focused on those periods rather than each individual album, it might have worked better. But I think it's a really good documentary. It's definitely worth watching. But I think it does drag a little bit. But yeah.
I agree. I think actually the thing that the documentary really succeeds in, I think it's the thing that it succeeds in that it's setting out to do, but also for me its ultimate downfall is that it seems to want to, if you don't know who Sparks is, like me, if you don't know who they are, you don't know what music they make, it wants to be like, here's this band that we all love, and here's why you should like them. It's like talking to a friend who like loves a band, who basically says, oh my god, they're this band who've got 25 albums, and here's why each of the albums is great, and here's the ones you should listen to. And so, in a sense, I feel like
you need to listen to the first 3 albums to really understand and get the most from the fourth and fifth. The fourth and fifth are the best, but you need to understand where they were in the 70s first to then come through. It's like, yeah, definitely got that vibe.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, and then I think that's also its downfall, in that that's great, but I think for 2 hours 15 it doesn't hold, you can't hold that conversation for that long. And it does try and kind of mix it up a little bit with the animation, and it is interesting, but I feel like kind of watching it in 2 parts would be great, like as a kind of a 2-part thing where early Sparks, later Sparks would be fantastic. But honestly, as a piece, as a documentary, as Edgar Wright's first documentary, I think it's great, and as a piece to explain who this band is really good. I came up with a really good understanding of who they were, of what songs I should listen to, and why they're good, which really helps. And I do think the interviews are great in it. I think that the talking heads are brilliant. I think Jason Schwartzman's interview is always very, very funny. It's not got enough Adam Buxton in it for me. There's only a short bit of Adam Buxton. I wanted more, but I understand he's not as famous as some of the others. Fine, but who I did have a lot of fun with it. I did also think there was some interesting stuff in there that they didn't delve into. Was that, especially at the beginning of their career, when clearly they wanted to be famous, and clearly they wanted to be, it's like, oh, they're kind of happy doing the art thing, but very clearly they wanted to be famous and successful, and they weren't afraid to just sack off the rest of the band when they wanted to do something else, which I think they don't really delve into that, because one of the band members goes, and then they just were like going to England, and I was like, all right, cool, fair enough. And I was like, yeah, but hang on a minute, you got fired. Like, is there not a story there about that you weren't, like, they did it about 2 or 3 times in the film. I was and then we just got rid of everyone. I was like, wait, what? That's a kind of a mega thing that you're just like, that's what people do. It's like, yeah, but that's kind of like heavy.
It does feel a little bit overly reverential at certain points, where it's like, we don't want to probe into perhaps the darker periods, like either when they were like didn't have a record deal and basically had like 6 years where they weren't. They were writing songs constantly, but they didn't put anything out. They didn't, they were struggling financially and stuff like that. Doesn't really push too hard into that. Doesn't push, because you're right. There's a couple of periods where there's like band members where they're like, oh yeah, so then they moved back to they just decided they wanted to go back to California, so we were all out of a job. And it doesn't. You definitely feel like, oh, there's more meat on that bone. But they don't want to they want to keep showing them in a good light. So,
and that's a problem with all. I think that's a problem with all music documentaries and many music biopics as well. In order to get the access, certain things are given up. Very only really Rocket Man is kind of the only
Rhapsody.
film.
I'm glad you touched on that, because one of you guys mentioned earlier, like, it has that biopic kind of feeling to it, and Bohemian Rhapsody is the perfect example because I get really fucking irritated by that movie
I hate that
being. Me too. I'm so glad you. I'm so worried. I was about to be like, I fucking hate Bohemian Rhapsody, and you were gonna like be. Oh no, Jack! That's my favorite film of all time.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
The best bit of Bohemian Rhapsody is the 20 minutes where they just show you the Live Aid performance. I'm because I'm just watching the Live Aid performance, but I'm watching someone mime it. Why not just watch the performance?
I hate that film. I hate that film. But one of my big problems with that is that it feels very sanitized, and it plays all the other members of the band, these lovely, sweet family men who have never done anything wrong in their entire lives. Also, Freddie's off to being crazy and doing loads of drugs and having loads of sex and stuff. But us, oh no, Roger Taylor's a sweet little angel, and Brian May is the loveliest bloke you've ever met in your life. Yeah. He's fucking not, according to the news recently.
Yeah.
Oh God, Brian May's been an arsehole for like 40 years. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But it is that like
telescopes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
It is that thing of like Rocket Man being the opposite to that. And Rocket Man being the only biopic I know of recently that isn't afraid to be like, no, the lead's a dick. Like he was a dick throughout this entire period, which is I think is a really difficult thing to do in music biopics, especially when the person's still alive. When the person's dead, it's significantly easier, but when the person is still alive, that's significantly harder to do, to get that rights and to get approval. And if you don't, then you end up with a situation where you release the film and the estate basically says, we have nothing to do with this, we hate it, it's all lies. So I don't think Sparks Brothers is that extreme. I do think it's like I do think that these do seem like really nice guys, and everyone who speaks about them in the film has got such a wide range of people, and I do think their music is really good. I think they're super interesting. There are moments, there's not so much like I want to find out when they were dicks. It's more like I want to find out actually what was it like when you had all that success in the 70s and then those two albums that didn't work. What did that kind of do to you? That's more interesting.
More, right?
Yeah. Other than just going, actually, Big Beat didn't work, so we did another album. Like, yeah, but like you kind of were on the top of your game, then couldn't break America for 30 years. Like, as Americans, what was that like? That wasn't really... It didn't really hammer that, which I kind of was more interested in finding out.
Yeah, that's when the broad scope really lets it down, because it just doesn't. If it did that, it would, and tried to do every album, it'd be fucking 4.5 hours long rather than 2.5 hours long. And so it could do with a little bit more focus.
Yeah, definitely. All that being said, I'm still desperately waiting to watch the Peter Jackson Beatles documentary, which is about 7 weeks long, as far as I know.
Something like that. Yeah. So
I think if you start watching it never actually ends.
Yeah.
At the end of the corridor that just keeps getting away from you in a dream, and you now get closer, constantly chasing after it. Yeah, exactly. Speaking of constantly chasing after things, let's talk about A Fistful of Fingers, shall we?
Do we have to?
We do, unfortunately. Going from the budget of, again, relatively low budget, just over $1 million for Sparks Brothers. It is a documentary that's basically a bunch of people talking and some animation stuff, so understandably fairly low budget, to $15,000 for A Fistful of Fingers. And yeah, I guess it's a film.
Look,
sure. It's basically a student film.
Yeah,
it is,
like good,
pretty much.
Good stuff first. Always like live with the positive. It is. He was 20 years old when he made it, and if I was 20 years old and I made that, I'd be fucking proud. It is like you can start to see the hallmarks of what he will become and who he will become later on. Those references, those camera tricks, the editing. It's like it is proto Edgar Wright in every single sense. It's got some whip pans in it, it's got some crash zooms in it, it's got some kind of fun little jokes. The camera pan, like edge of cliff, the camera pans to the right, and you see it hits a sign that says edge of frame before quickly coming back. Like it's got some nice little moments in it. We go, okay, yeah, that's Edgar. I can see that. But it is clearly a film made by a 20-year-old with his friends whose ambition far outweighs what he can currently do. To the point of he only has white male friends, and that becomes very awkward at certain points of the film.
Yes, it certainly does.
So, again, it's 1995 and he's 20 years old, so I will forgive him certain things, probably why that film's never really been released wide nowadays.
Yeah,
But
it did actually get a cinema release at the time. I think in his like local cinema, which is why we can discuss it. It's why it's on
yes,
the thing. But yeah, it's the kind of thing that now would be on YouTube.
yeah,
You
oh
know, or
yeah,
Vimeo if he's feeling very fancy.
I mean, it is on YouTube. That's how I watched it.
Yes.
So it is literally on YouTube. If you guys do want to go and watch it after you finish this live stream, please do. Good luck, I guess. Yeah, and interesting. There's a brilliant line on the Wikipedia page that is like, it debuted at this cinema in 1995, blah, blah, blah. It debuted in America 20 years later.
Yes.
Of course it did.
Yeah.
There's no chance this was leaving the UK in that same millennium. Like, yeah, oh, it's a bit of a cult thing now. Everybody likes Edgar Wright. He's just, he's about to do Baby Driver, just done Scott Pilgrim, all that kind of stuff. What did he do first? Like, do you want to know? I feel like you don't want to know. For those of you who don't know, it is basically a spoof Western type thing made by a bunch of 20-something British kids. And a couple of, I mean, there's a couple of named people that appear and stuff.
There's people who've gone on to be better known, like being in like British soaps and stuff like that. And then a weird cameo by Jeremy Beadle.
Jeremy Beadle of all people.
That's amazing. I completely forgot that was in the film because I remember hearing about that ages ago. Like I remember reading an interview with him about it. I completely forgot that was in it until I was watching it last night. I was like, oh yeah, Jeremy Beadle. That is bizarre. That is. But again, it just shows that's such an Edgar Wrighty kind of thing. It's definitely got like a Monty Python sense of humor mixed with what he would later be kind of trying to do. It's got that, it is a proper spoof of spaghetti western. There's an awful lot of what Hot Fuzz would later be within it. So you've got a western shot in Somerset, and I think even the poster says that the greatest spaghetti western ever ... shot in Somerset. And it's got that sort of like the actors kind of doing American accents, kind of doing British accents at points. So it has moments you can pick out and go, oh, okay, yeah, he did that 20 years later. Oh, he did that 10 years later or something else. As a piece, but I mean, I was like, I got 20 minutes into it. I was like, oh my God, I've got an hour left. I'm so bored.
It's funny that this is about an hour shorter, maybe even more than the Sparks Brothers, and it feels about the same length.
Oh God.
It's, because I think it's, like we said, there's a lot that you can see. You can see the potential. You can see his like talent for like visual jokes and stuff like that, and just the kinetic style and a sense of comedy storytelling that goes beyond the kind of let's just point the camera at some funny people and let that do the work. Like no, you're actually going to use the directing to sell the humor. You can see all that, but it also, like, the plot is paper thin. It's like there's a Clint Eastwood analog who wants to kill a man. That's basically it.
That's it.
There's your plot, folks. There you go.
And you can tell because the pacing, it's got some Edgar Wrighty type pacing, except for certain moments where it just stays on for way too long. And for me, I was like, it's got that almost Garth Marenghi, like we didn't have enough footage, so we kind of left it rolling to fill the half an hour. It's like it kind of just at one point it goes to black and there's like a pause until one of the actors says a joke. But the problem is that joke should come in 10 seconds earlier than it does. But because clearly they didn't have enough footage, like just stick another bit of time on the end of it to hope we get there.
It very much feels like he was filming it with the aim of it being like 45 minutes long, and then like halfway through the shoot was like, actually we could make this a feature length if we just stretch it out a bit. I have no idea if that's the actual case, but like it has that feeling because there's some bits that are really tightly paced, and then there's other bits, like you say, they just seem to drag, or it's a lot of people wandering around in the West that's actually
I
Dorset.
mean, that is the West in a way.
The West Country, yes.
It's West Country,
yeah.
There's a lot of like jokes that are repeated, and it never gets to the point of like, oh, they're repeating them. So that thing where you can like do a joke where it stops being funny and then goes back to being funny again. Like, no, these just stop being funny.
Yeah.
And then,
pretty much.
but it was also
Right.
like it's also the thing of I keep kind of having to go back to if I'd made that when I was, because I can't watch any of the crap that I made when I was 20. But if I had made that when I was 20, I'd be super proud of it. And I think even like knowing that where he got to from there, as like I look at the stuff I made when I was 20, I was like, I can see where I got to from there to here, and I can see that within that. But I mean, I don't think it's going to win.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we get
I
to the
think,
vote, gents.
Like it's the kind of thing where if as a 20-year-old, if you had that and could go and could show it to people and be like, oh, I made this. It's a whole film. I made it on a tiny budget, and like there's like special effects, like people get decapitated in it and stuff like that. And it got shown in cinemas and stuff like that. It's such a I can absolutely understand at the time, like you say, being very proud of it and having that be the gateway to then going on to doing other things. But like, it's such an early piece of work.
Yeah.
It's kind of if we weren't in the internet age, this would never have been seen by people like outside of his hometown, pretty much.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right, let's get to the vote, shall we? I'm up first. Unsurprisingly, I am picking the Sparks Brothers. Tim, how about you?
Sparks Brothers.
Race across the board.
I mean, I was going to say Fistful of Fingers, but after this, obviously Sparks Brothers, obviously.
Sparks Brothers is the highest rated compared to the lowest rated. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Sparks Brothers moves on to the next round. Next up, what Reece has deemed the hardest of the rounds so far, or maybe the whole tournament, we'll find out. Baby Driver versus Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That's a clunky sentence. Baby Driver is, of course, from 2017. It's 1 hour 53. It has a 92% on the tomatometer, 395 reviews, and an audience score of 86%. Compared to 2010's Scott Pilgrim versus the World, very similar runtime, 1 hour 52, 1 minute shorter, and an 82% on the tomatometer from 273 reviews and an audience score of 84%. So very similar audience score, very similar runtime, but the critics have Baby Driver 10% higher. So let's start with Baby Driver, shall we, gentlemen? Tim, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts about Baby Driver?
Um,
I feel like you and I might have the same. Judging by that side, we might have a similar opinion.
I think the opening, 8-9 minutes of Baby Driver is fantastic. That opening car chase is so good. It's edited within the inch of its life.
Yep.
It's a perfect short little film. But I think,
and then there's an hour and 40 minutes after that as well.
Yes, exactly. The problem is that that is the best part of the film, and it happens in the first 9 minutes, and then you've got another hour and a half of film to go. And I think that in a way, like Baby Driver, it was his first film in a while. It feels like there was quite a big gap between what would it have been, The World's End, and then Baby Driver.
Because he was doing Ant-Man, obviously.
He was doing Ant-Man, he was helping write Tintin, etc., etc. So there was quite a big gap. And so I think I think that during that time, people had built up affection for Edgar Wright. And so when it came back, when he returned with Baby Driver, people were so ready to be like, oh, it's fantastic, like it's great. It's him like taking on this big Hollywood film as opposed to these like little British productions, which I think there are certain American critics who are always just going to favour an American film over a British production. But I think that like the editing in it is fantastic. The way it pairs with music is really great. But I think it also showcases how thin his characters can be. I think more than any other film, these characters are just like, they're barely caricatures. They're like one-word descriptions. And I think that's what ultimately lets it down, is like, I don't care about anyone in this film. I think it just fails to land for me. Reece, what are your feelings about Baby Driver?
I kind of agree with what you said, and at the same time don't agree. In that I love it. I absolutely love Baby Driver. It was probably my favorite film of that year. I can't remember what else came out that year, but I've seen it so many times. I see someone in this chat mention the Moon Royale music video that he directed as well, which is kind of the inspiration for Baby Driver, which what it comes from with Noel Fielding in the music video. So if you've not seen that, that sort of sits as the bit just before the car chase in Baby Driver, and it kind of goes just before that. I think the opening kind of car chase is incredible. I think they put it online before the film, and I must have watched it kind of, I don't know, 20, 30 times after I saw the film, and every single time just like seeing a different thing in it, like, oh, the police lights kind of match up with the beat, and that I love that. I agree with you, the characters are very thin, but I actually don't mind that in this film, because I think the style of the film that it is kind of based around sort of archetypal characters, or stereotypical characters that, and it does play with them a little bit. Like, I love can we spoil Baby Driver? It's been a few years.
Yeah, it's 4 years old. Go for it. Spoiler warning for Baby Driver, folks.
I love the fact that the person you think is going to be the villain dies quite quickly, and suddenly actually there's another villain. I love that kind of that flip. I know, like, there's an awful lot said about, like, Edgar Wright can't write women, and that's absolutely true. But at the same time, I think everyone's kind of like that. But Baby doesn't have like that much of a kind of an arc, not an arc, that much of a thing either. So actually, him and Deborah work really well as a pairing, because it's just so kind of like, it is a film that is steeped in kind of classic Hollywood nostalgia, and with it kind of being his first big Hollywood film for 7 years, I get that, and it just goes for me. The film just like I think because it's structured like an album, and it's structured like a musical, that every so often there's a musical number in it that just kind of brings me back up again. So whilst that initial bit is fantastic, the car chase, I think then the next bit with the Harlem Shuffle, when he's walking along, grabs me, and then suddenly you have the bit where he's hearing about what the car chase is, and he's kind of playing the keyboard almost like on the table as the car, as this, like, everything about it, it just flows. I really love it. I don't know why. I just absolutely love it. I think it's funny. I think the car chase, the action is superbly directed. I know that he kind of didn't direct a lot of the action. I think some of it was done by second unit, but the way it's edited is pure Edgar Wright. The way it's structured is pure Edgar Wright. I've listened to that vinyl I don't know how many times. I've seen the film I don't know how many times. Yeah, I really love Baby Driver. Jack, I think you're going to disagree with me.
I am about to disagree with you. Yeah, I'm way more in Tim's camp. I saw Baby Driver at the time. I can't remember if I saw it in cinemas or not. I don't think I did. But I saw it not too long after it came out, and I was just like, okay, cool. Yeah, like you said, first 10 minutes, I'm on board and stuff, and I straight up forgot the last hour of that film. Like, yeah, there's some more driving and stuff, I guess, and there's like a safe house, and then there's a heist bit that goes wrong, and I fucking forgot. I had to rewatch it like fairly recently to be like, did I see Baby Driver? I'm pretty sure I saw Baby Driver. Weird enough, when you said like Reece about the music video, the music pulling you through the film, that's exactly how I felt. I feel like I would kind of tune out and dip out of it a bit when some of the character stuff was going on, because as you said, Tim, I agree with you. I think they're incredibly thin kind of characters, but then there would be a cool, piece of editing, or the music would pick up and stuff like that, and it would kind of reimburse my interest and bring me back to life. But yeah, it just doesn't work for me in the same way other Edgar Wright movies do, and we will get on to some of my favorites in a moment. Yeah. But I don't know what it is about it. It just didn't work for me, and it's never worked for me, and I've seen it 2 or 3 times now, and I am still completely ambivalent and just like, whatever, it's fine. John Hamm's good. Turns out Ansel Elgort's a piece of shit, so the less we talk about him, the better. Whatever. Yeah, it just doesn't do much for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I get and I know some of the actors in it are obviously we don't have to mention his name, but K-Pax obviously is in it, and I know that like even like talking to my dad when he watched it, he was like, "I'll watch it, but it's got him in it. I don't really want to watch him." And I do agree. Whilst I agree with that, that does kind of put my back up a bit when I'm watching it again now.
I struggle to go back and watch stuff with people like that guy in it. Yeah.
It does, but I remember hearing something like, I think it was Greta Gerwig said it a few years ago when she was talking about like not working with Woody Allen in the future, but still talking about like how, like I mentioned, Annie Hall as being one of my favorite films, and I can't get away from that. Like the influences I have are still going to have been my influences. I can't get away from the things I like, but going forward, I could be very much more selective about what I do, who I work with, and what I watch, which is very much how I feel about it. Like there's also whilst I don't want to watch it for him, there is also 1,000 other people who worked on that film, and I think that the work stands apart from that one actor being in that. I think there's so much more around it that I can enjoy around it without. I'm not directly supporting him. There are thousands of other people, and the editors, boom operators, scripts who worked on that, but. In that sense, yes, that is a difficult thing to watch with him in it. But the film, looking at it purely from objectively from the film perspective, I mean, there's not much more to say about it. In that, I do thoroughly enjoy it. I think the chase sequence at the end, with the kind of the more prog rock song, I can't remember the name of the song now, but where Ansel Elgort's running on foot. I just think the editing in it's fantastic. I just think as a piece of filmmaking, it is a spectacular piece of filmmaking.
I wonder if that's the difference maker, because I'm not a filmmaker. I know I've said this on the podcast, I've said this on the live streams before. I'm very much coming at this from a person who likes watching films and talking about films and stuff, but I've never directed a thing in my life. I've never made a video that isn't me just talking to camera like one of these live streams or something like that. I wonder if your understanding and your appreciation from the other side of the camera adds another layer and another level to it that someone like me who has never done that can't fully appreciate, if that makes sense. That adds to your kind of like enjoyment of like, oh, the editing is so slick, the way this is shot, like you're kind of understanding it in a different way to I am. Like I won't pick up on a shot being used for this particular reason to reference this thing from Bullet or whatever it is, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's quite possible. And I think it is a lot of Baby Driver is. I'm much for like the Harlem Shuffle sequence where he's walking through and it's all done in the one take. Like I'm watching that and it's that like that I remember seeing maybe I watched the director's commentary on it or something like that, but just hearing about like how difficult it is from the going outside, getting the exposure right when they're coming back in again and coming back out and making sure the exposure works and everyone's hitting their marks. The fact in that sequence that the graffiti has changed on the walls when he walks back through, like it's just there's so much thought being put into every single frame of that film, and I really appreciate that, and I think that even then I do also really enjoy the story, just as a kind of like as if I'm watching a film from the kind of late 60s, early 70s as well. Whereas I know we talk about references an awful lot with Edgar Wright films, but that wears its references on its sleeve in a very different way to something like Shaun, or definitely something different to Hot Fuzz, in that it's a film that wants to sit alongside those other films from the past whilst being its own thing and using kind of more modern techniques. And I really appreciate that. I think that's really, I don't know, I thoroughly enjoy it. But then we've also got another one in this category.
Yeah, I think there is some amazing filmmaking in it, and like Reece, I have watched that first chase like 20-30 times just because, like you say, they put it on YouTube to encourage people to go and see it, and it was like, oh great, okay, I'm not even watching it on some shitty other channel that's got graphics propping up going like, please like and subscribe. So I could I watched that over and over again, and I've watched things like the foot chase and the tequila shootout. I think are really like the editing's tight on them and stuff like that. They are really good, and his ability to like match the editing to the pace of the music is so great. But it feels to me it feels like it's almost like a lot of vignettes of like really well done, like the opening chase, the Harlem Shuffle bit, these individual things, and I think it doesn't hold together as like a as a whole movie because I don't care about the characters. And I think it's, we talked about how it's got a couple of problematic people in it, and I think there's certain films where it's really difficult because they're, you find out about an actor or whatever, and their performance is so central to a film. I think this is almost an easier one to rewatch because the characters are so thin, and like you could almost they almost just feel like human shaped props that are being moved around to me. So I don't really have to think about certain people's performances because they're saying the witty dialogue, they're saying the clever lines, but there's very little humanity to them. And I think to me, like it feels like it wants to focus on that central romance, and I think it just doesn't make me feel anything about that. I think it has some amazing sequences, but for me, as a film in total, it doesn't work. It's so style over substance.
That's completely fair. Yeah, completely fair.
Let's talk about Scott Pilgrim versus the World then, shall we, gentlemen? Moving on to 2010, as I said. Reece, why don't you kick us off for this one? How do you feel about the thing you're wearing a t-shirt of and have your name tag of, and there's a piece of art behind you, I believe, as well. All that stuff.
Hate it. It's terrible. No.
Okay, cool. Next round.
So I went to see this the day it came out up in Edinburgh. And I went with a friend of mine when we were at the festival. And he said to me when we came out that I had a smile on my face from the opening credits and it didn't leave my face for the next... for the entire film. So I imagine myself, where Knives at the beginning is watching Sex by Bomb and her eyes are like got the stars in them. That was me watching this film. I absolutely love it, and I know it's got problems. Like, I know it kind of falls apart towards the end. It doesn't have the length of the comic. The beautiful thing about the graphic novel is that it goes over a good period of months, and by the time we get to the fourth book, him and Ramona have been together for ages. Whereas this is kind of very compressed in a couple of. It's a bit harder to kind of deal with their relationship, especially when we get to the fight between Ramona and Roxy. We don't have the deep sense of Scott and Ramona's relationship, so that bit always kind of sits a little bit apart from me. Even though I thoroughly love that bit, it doesn't have that same connection with the book what I do with the characters in that moment. That being said, I just think it's fantastic. I think the way it's put together is brilliant. I think the casting is fantastic throughout that film. Like, every single cast member feels exactly like that character, and I think probably a lot of that comes from the fact that the books are being written at the same time as the script, and they were kind of influencing each other a little bit throughout. A lot of that comes from that. It holds an incredibly dear place in my heart, this film. I still laugh at all the jokes. I still think it's hilarious. I still will answer every single time I see gelato. I still have to say, it's milk and eggs, bitch. Every single time. Chicken isn't vegan. Like, all of that stuff. I just think that's absolutely hilarious. The music is on my playlist constantly. And it's just a fun film. It's just a fun film to watch. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Jack, let's go to you first.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. Why not? I fucking love Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Like I said, I was reading the comics at the time and really enjoying them, and kind of like everything kind of synchronized, like I said, with the video game, the comics, and the film all coming out at once. And yeah, you're totally right, Reece, that it feels so compressed compared to the books. But they even kind of reference that. Like, you get the moment, like Stephen Stills is my favorite character from the comics, and see him brought to life in the film is fantastic. And you have that moment where he comes out and he was like, "You just weren't paying attention, Scott. You're off doing your own thing. Like, this is an integral part of me as a person, but you don't even give a shit." And I know a lot of people have problems with it because Scott isn't likable. And I'm like, that's kind of the point.
Scott's a dick in the books.
Yeah, that's the whole
Scott's
point.
A dick.
Yeah. He's worse in the comics than he is in the film as a person. But even like trimming out a bunch of the other stuff, like obviously Knives' dad doesn't really show up in the films and stuff, and the way they do the what are the brothers' names?
The
Katanagi twins.
Katanagi twins. Yeah, that battle, that like Kong versus Dragon Godzilla thing is brilliant and ridiculous and fantastic. And a moment I wasn't, having read the comics up until that point, not a moment I expected. And I was like, oh shit, wow, they're going in that direction. And yeah, the fact that it almost kind of kicks off with like a Bollywood dance scene turning into a fight and stuff, and you're like, that's such a clever way of doing that moment. That's like, again, it's the use of music. I feel like, weirdly enough, Scott Pilgrim is the substance over style that I enjoy compared to Baby Driver. I think the music ties into Scott Pilgrim, and the visuals and all that kind of stuff just hit on every level for me in Scott Pilgrim, whereas Baby Driver just doesn't quite hit in that same way. And I find it very interesting we've got them as the two kind of matched up against each other. Like you said, Reece, it's an interesting and difficult combination, because out of his films that I've seen, I haven't seen Last Night at Soho, obviously, we'll get to that later on, but like those are the two kind of substance, the least substance, the most style over substance kind of films that he's done that I've seen. So it's an interesting combination, but I just love the whole setting. Like you said, I will never not laugh at. I think Kieran Culkin is absolutely incredible as Wallace. just incredible, amazing delivery, and yeah, like Michael Cera's fine. I'm never going to be like the biggest Michael Cera fan, but I think he does a good enough job, and he's awkward enough and weird enough and a bit of a dick enough to play Scott. And what's the again, I'm like, this is one of the ones I didn't rewatch for this because I feel like I know it so well, and now I'm spacing on stuff. The song that Brie Larson sings, and
Black Sheep.
Black Sheep.
By
Yes.
Metro,
there we go.
Yeah. That's almost actually,
Thank you, Remy. Literally as I said it, yeah. Metro's Black Sheep. That version with her singing is the one I always have in my head. And sometimes it will just pop in, hello again, friend of a friend. And I'm like, why is that? Why have I got that in my head? Where's that? Oh shit, that's from Scott Pilgrim. Bam, 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 bam. And
the edit in that is so, love it. I love that bit so much. I just all of the music in it, especially the music that's written for it, is so good. I know Beck did a lot of the music for it. The Ramona song is just amazing.
The credits is Beck doing Ramona. I'm like,
so
they actually wrote this song. You think they would just leave it at Ramona, and then that's it, and then just leave it at that. And Metric, not Metro. Apparently, thank you very much for correcting us in the chat. The music is fantastic. Scott is a bass player, and I'm a bass player, and I was just like, yes. When it busts out some actually cool bass riffs, and then of course Todd Ingram, played by Brandon Routh, comes back with insane bass riffs as well. And
that bass battle, so good. The bass battle, so much fun. And we not even spoken about the graphics yet. The graphics in that, the graphics in that bass battle, kind of really, really sell it. But throughout the kind of mix of that, it's like I think a lot of people say like it is the greatest video game movie ever made, and it's not based on a video game. It absolutely is a video game movie. Everything from the noise, from the sound effects to the way the graphics kind of pop up, and it
punches people into coins and
all of that
kind of stuff. Yeah,
and it does it from the beginning, and it never lets up. It does it from right at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in Ontario, Canada. Like it completely goes from the beginning. It doesn't. A lot of these films kind of give up on that kind of thing halfway through.
The 8-bit Universal theme.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Chris Evans is amazing as well. Just a shout out from Andy there. Just
that fight sequence. That fight sequence with that fight sequence with him and Lucas Lee at the castle is like the choreography in the fight scenes is brilliant. I think insane. Brad Allen did the fight sequences as well in the film. So like obviously it's going to be fantastic. And Brad Allen, who passed away earlier this year, I believe.
Peace, Brad Allen. Yep.
One of the greatest fight choreographers ever. Just an incredible sequences, and that whole sequence. I mean, look, the cast is full of people who would later go on to become superheroes and some of the most famous actors in the world. So, like I said, the casting is incredible. But that moment was that Chris Evans just being so funny. Like even like the little reference to the nods to him doing two things at once. Like, oh my god, that's hilarious. All of that's just perfect.
Yeah, Chris Evans' ability to go from the nicest guy in the world to an absolute douchebag just by angling his eyebrows slightly differently is incredible. Because I remember when they did that, because they did a 10-year reunion script read, I think.
Yes, that was so
yeah,
good.
so good.
And obviously now you're so used to him as Captain America, and he just kind of goes like, and suddenly he's turned back into Lucas Lee. Yeah, I mean it's so good. I think I'm someone who always beats the drama of superpowers not being creatively shown enough on film, and I think because Scott Pilgrim is so stylized, it enables such an amazing visual imagination. We talked about comparing it to Baby Driver, and I think because Baby Driver is much more rooted in reality, it doesn't go quite as crazy. Like, there's some things that like it does that are even better than Scott Pilgrim, like in terms of like editing and stuff like that. But because Scott Pilgrim has the freedom to just go completely off the wall, and you get all the visual effects are so clever in terms of how they're like processing, like we said, video games, comic book imagery, all that kind of stuff. The little still that we've chosen for the graphic, like that radiating circles when he's being lifted up is so great. Yeah, I can remember the first trailer for this coming out and being around a friend's house, and us all, just because we were all big fans of the comic, just like when the announcement came and it was like, oh, Edgar Wright's directing it, we were all like and then that first trailer coming out and us all like gathering around the fucking Apple's QuickTime movie trailers website and being like, let's watch it again. Yeah, I think the criticisms that you raised, Reece, that it feels a little compressed, is absolutely fair. I think it is almost a movie that would be better if he ended up with knives.
Which he does in the original cut of the film.
Yeah,
so in the deleted scenes that he did, and the audiences they tested it with all said, wait, why does he not end up with Ramona like he should do?
Yeah.
And so it would have been way more interesting, I think, had they kept that original ending of it.
I think, like you say, because you don't have that space in the Scott-Ramona relationship, it doesn't land emotionally like quite as hard. But I think it's also the line of like, I'm not fighting you for her, I'm fighting you for me. Like, that idea that really, as much as it's about their romance, it's about Scott kind of getting over himself to a certain degree, still works. And we've said, like, the jokes so good, still hold up. The visual creativity on show is fantastic.
Just I always love, it's like a joke that never really gets a laugh, which I don't understand why, is when Anna Kendrick talks about like, did you think you had a future with her? And it's like, what, with like jetpacks? Which I think's hilarious, and nobody else finds it funny. And it's I think the jokes work so wonderfully. I think all of the fight sequences, every single one of the X's is great in its own way.
Yeah. The Matthew Patel fight scene that like kicks off, the Bollywood one that then turns into like, that fight choreography is like better than most of like Marvel film fight choreography.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Should we get to voting then, gents?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Tim, you're up first.
Scott Pilgrim for me.
Reece.
Yeah, absolutely Scott Pilgrim.
Across the board, it's unanimous. Scott Pilgrim goes through to the next round. Congratulations. We'll get Scott versus Sparks in a minute. But before we get to that, Shaun of the Dead versus World's End. Two members of the Cornetto trilogy battling it out. Interesting. Very interesting. We'll come first to Shaun of the Dead. Let me get my thing sorted here. Hold on. Where's World's End? There we are. We'll come to Shaun of the Dead first, of course, from... no, that's Baby Driver, go away. Shaun of the Dead from 2004, an hour and 37 minutes long, 92% on the Tomatometer from 215 reviews, and 93% from the audience score, with over 250,000 reviews from the audience there, compared to 2013's The World's End, 89% on the Tomatometer from 244 reviews, and 71%, so noticeably lower on the audience score side of things, with over 50,000 reviews from the audience side of things. I think this is probably the easiest choice for me. I know I've talked about Shaun of the Dead on the show before. We did an episode on zombies. One of my picks was Shaun of the Dead. Go figure. And yeah, it was such a moment in time for me. I was 14 when it came out, so I'm like that, just too young to really get most of the jokes, but I wanted to feel cool, and I had a friend of mine who was like 2 or 3 years older, and he got the DVD like a year or two later, so I'm 16 and he's like 18 at this point, and it was like, I've got a DVD of this really cool zombie movie. I was like, what? Let's go watch it. I was like, oh my god! And it was the coolest film I had ever seen in my life until that point. That was like, if you could wear out a DVD, we would have worn out that DVD. I have seen that film more than most films in my entire life, and it was just a moment in time for me to really like turn me on to British comedy and understanding filmmaking in different ways. You know, we've touched on how much I don't know about filmmaking, but really understanding editing techniques and cutting things to music and all that kind of stuff. I was just like, this is next level shit. Oh my god, this is blowing teenage Jack's mind. This is amazing. And yeah, I absolutely adore Shaun of the Dead in many ways. We've talked about being problematic from a casting side of thing, from Baby Driver. They do say the N-word in Shaun of the Dead. Oh, Nick Frost does say the N-word in Shaun of the Dead. It's a bit cringe and a bit uncomfortable. Yeah, see? Everyone does that. I remind people on the regular. Everybody's like, God, I fucking love Shaun of the Dead. And I was like, me too. Nick Frost did say the N-word, though, didn't he? And everybody goes, oh, yeah, so he did. Yeah. That's kind of the thing of like, not the only moment that stuck out in my brain, obviously, but like, there's a couple of moments like that where I'm like, oh, it's a very early 2000s, hasn't aged particularly well kind of thing about it, but it has I have such nostalgia for it, and it holds such a special place in my kind of like growth as a person who enjoys films and all that kind of stuff, growing into a teenager and now being a dude who literally podcasts about movies. So yeah, I absolutely love it, and have basically followed Simon Pegg and Nick Frost ever since then, going back and watching Spaced and stuff like that, and having a new perspective on, like you said, Tim, all those references and stuff like that, then going and finding other stuff from all the stuff they're referencing in Shaun of the Dead, and then all the stuff they're referencing in Spaced. Oh my god, it's like blown my mind and opened my world to so many interesting new things. I absolutely love Shaun of the Dead for even how flawed and problematic it is in a 2021 kind of retroactive look. But yeah, I absolutely adore that film. How about you guys?
Reece, let's hear your thoughts.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I love Shaun of the Dead. I do. I like it. Like, it's easy. Like, I love Shaun of the Dead. I think it's I think it stands next to With No and I for me as one of the greatest British comedies ever made. Like, ooh. I just think it's brilliant. I think it's so funny. I think it's really dark at the end. I think the way it shifts from being really funny to like when they're downstairs in the thing, and it's like I've shot my mum and my stepdad. I don't think I could shoot my best friend as well. Like it's super dark at the end, but it is. Like, it is a fantastic genre film, as well as being a fantastic rom-com, as well as being a fantastic kind of like just drama. It is a brilliant zombie film as well. The way it does eventually shift, it starts as kind of horror comedy, and it does shift into actual full-on horror at the end of it. It's got two brilliant central performances by Nick Frost and Simon Pegg. But the supporting cast of characters are also incredible. I'm really sorry, my buzz is just going off for my door. I'll be back in 1 second. Carry on amongst yourselves.
Tim, you take over.
I will take over. Yeah, I mean, much of what we said, like Shaun of the Dead, I came to it already loving like the team behind it, essentially from Spaced, but it's so great. I think it includes, it has so many of Edgar Wright's like visual flourishes, like the tracking shot where you get Sean going to the shops, and then the repeated version when
repeated
it's
version post-apocalypse. Yeah.
The clever like use of foreshadowing and all that kind of stuff. The we'll have a bite at the king's head and a couple at the little princess and all that stuff that's Bloody Mary in the morning. It's so great. Like that moment where Mary the zombie stands up, and then you just have Nick Frost winding the camera on, which probably doesn't work to like teenagers watching it now are like, what the fuck
Yeah,
is
that's
he
a good
doing?
point, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's so good. I think in like, I won't dive into that too much because I'm sure we'll get onto that later. I was about to talk to it about it versus Hot Fuzz, but I have a feeling we'll be talking about that fairly soon.
We might get to that in a moment.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we talked about Fistful of Fingers as like a statement of like, here I am, I'm 20 years old. This is this thing that's like incredibly ambitious. Like, give me TV work. Let me into this industry. And in terms of like coming off of Spaced and going to and coming out with Shaun of the Dead as a way to announce yourself as like, no, I'm ready to do films now. I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to kind of move up to this level and become a name that not just like a small number of people who watch Channel 4 in the UK. No, I'm going to become, like one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite films of the year, that kind of thing, and move up, that echelon. It's such a statement of like, hello, I'm great.
and like by the time we get around to Shaun of the Dead, Edgar Wright is 30. So like, think of how much you mature, like personally and professionally, in those 10 years, going from Fistful of Fingers all the way through to Shaun of the Dead, and obviously Spaced in the middle, and a bunch of other projects in the middle as well. But just thinking about how much I have changed from being 20 and now being 31, I think about what a different person you are as a creator and all that kind of stuff. You really see him mature into, like we said, there's little hints of it in Fistful of Fingers, but Shaun of the Dead is really where it kind of like solidifies, and his style and the brilliant use of music, and every time I sing White Lines, I do the zombie noises every single time. If it comes on, I am bubba dabba 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 every single time.
Sorry about that. Something a delivery driver was trying to deliver fish and chips to us that we didn't order. So I don't know what's happening there. But I think, I don't know if you guys have spoken about it. An incredible bit in the movie is the two single take shots, which again something he uses throughout the thing. But the way the callbacks between the two of them, the way it's exactly the same shot with just little moments of difference that properly sell what was going on. The runner that's a runner at the beginning and he's running away from a zombie in the next bit. The slip on the bit of blood in the supermarket. Everything about those two together is an incredibly confident filmmaker. Just an incredibly, and I watched a thing with him on I think it's on the Variety YouTube channel.
Vanity Fair.
Was it Vanity Fair YouTube? Yes, Vanity Fair YouTube channel.
I literally just looked it up to reference it.
Where he talks about, it's a recent thing. He goes about through different shots throughout each of his movies, and he speaks about that one, and he speaks about how the DOP was like, you'll never use this in the movie. So Edgar Wright basically just threw loads of stuff at it so that he couldn't cut it out of the movie.
All the references to the other zombies and stuff that are in the second time around, once they're zombies, are references to the stuff that was supposed to be cut out the first time round. So the lawnmower and the guy washing his car and stuff, and you see the guy in the blue jacket over there, and the groom who's making his way very slowly up towards him, and obviously the homeless guy with his dog and all that kind of stuff. It's just Oh yeah, amazing stuff.
And again, the ensemble around them are fantastic. Like, we talk about Nick Frost and Simon Pegg an awful lot, but everyone else around them is great. Dylan Moran,
your best mate Bill Nye as well. Yeah,
my best mate Bill Nye is in it as well. Just
and my best mate Jessica Hines. Yeah.
It's got some like really fantastic moments in it of that. I think it succeeds in everything it tries to do. Which is, especially for someone's second film, technically his first film, I guess, but his second film, it's really his first film. Let's be honest. It succeeds in everything it's trying to do, and as the kickstart for someone's career, it's just brilliant. It's the work of a very accomplished director and a very accomplished writing team, but it's the first time they've ever done one.
Yeah. There's one joke that always stands out to me that I missed the first 15 times I watched it or whatever. And I rewatched it with commentary from Pegg, right? I think it's Pegg, Wright and Frost as a trio. And Simon Pegg talks about his favorite joke is when he tells Dylan Moran's character, go fuck yourself, Four Eyes, is the only moment where Dylan Moran takes his glasses off, and he's like he's wiping them on his shirt, and the only time he tells him to, oh, go fuck yourself, Four Eyes, is the only time he actually takes his glasses off in the whole movie. And I was like, that's just a brilliant, stupid little joke that nobody will ever notice in a million years, but I fucking love it. It's that like I said, it opened my eyes to like the level of attention to detail that I wasn't even aware of, and all those little tiny little moments, and just like throwing the vinyl out and deciding like, oh no, don't throw that one, that's a limited edition, and all they're like brilliant little things, and every little scene has an extra little bit and an extra moment, and so good, so good.
I always love the line. I think I wrote like an entire blog about the line, oh my god, he's got an arm off. Because it always makes me giggle. It always makes me laugh. It's like there's a zombie coming in the house, and the first thing they go is like, "Oh my god, he's got an arm off!" It's just brilliant.
It's such a British reaction to that situation. Yeah, I the other day I got the line stuck in my head. I can't remember if it's Kate Ashfield or Lucy Davis who says it, but the line of "we have to make the best of it." It's great. Shall we move on to The World's End?
Yeah, we should do. Part of the Cornetto trilogy, as I touched on earlier, but my least favorite of the Cornetto trilogy. I'm saying that now, and I know a couple of people in the chat have said that as well. It's generally accepted that The World's End is the weakest link of that trilogy. Apparently not. A mate of mine has a fucking tattoo of it. But I think in general, consensus, consensus from critics and people who are not absolutely mental, think that Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and obviously The World's End make that trilogy. The World's End is the weakest. I think you touched on something earlier, Reece, that I definitely have experienced. Rewatching it, I come to appreciate it a bit more each time. I don't love it as much as Shaun of the Dead, and I don't love it as much as Hot Fuzz. Obviously, we'll get onto Hot Fuzz in a moment, but it's kind of somewhere in that Baby Driver area where I'm like, it just doesn't click with me in a couple of ways that just take it down a few pegs. But I'm slowly inching up. Every time I watch it, like, and now I get that reference to that thing, and I see what they did there, and all this kind of stuff. There's some very obvious stuff, like the fence running side of things that is obviously throughout the three, and the cornettos and all that kind of stuff. But there are little bits and pieces, and again, that attention to detail that is throughout so much of Wright's work. I come to appreciate a bit more and more about The World's End. And I know he touches on the bar fight scene in that Vanity Fair video. Again, I'll link it in the description and stuff like that, so you guys can go and watch it later on. And he talks about how Nick Frost's character like unleashes his he went back in the day when he did drink, he was probably like a big barroom brawler. And I was like, I didn't really think about that, but yeah, I guess it is. And him using the stools to just like punch people's heads off and stuff. He's like, they're real foam stools, and Nick Frost is just whacking stunt actors with them. They had a great time. And I was like, that does look like a lot of fun. But yeah, the plot is just a bit, it goes a couple of steps too far in a weird direction to me. I'm like, should that be the ending? Kind of similar to Scott Pilgrim. Like, maybe he should have ended up with knives. Like, is that really the resolution we're going for? Is like, fuck you, aliens. Like, I don't know. Maybe he should have learned a lesson. Like, is this the message we're sending? Okay, fair enough.
It's such a film of kind of different bits for me, because I love that fight in the Beehive. I think it's like an absolutely terrific action sequence. I can remember at the time, someone I follow on Twitter was like, any best sort of film of the year stuff that isn't talking about the Beehive fight and the downtown fight in Pacific Rim is nonsense. But I think, as much as I love that little action sequence, and I think it's shot amazingly well, the stunt work in it is so great. I think the stuff with like Simon Pegg trying to finish his pint is really clever.
And catching the beer in the glass again, something Edgar Wright brings up in that video.
Yeah. To me, the film would almost, and I know it has to have that something to push the characters to make the choices that they do, and to push them out of their comfort zones, but it would almost work better without any of the sci-fi supernatural element in it. If it was just about these guys reuniting and trying to do this thing, and make it much more of a like an emotional, like grounded story, I think it would work so much better, because I think there's an emotional core to that that's really good and is kind of his most mature film. I think that some of the territory that it explores is actually like incredibly mature, and dealing with like growing up and life being disappointed is very much like you could so tell the difference between Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz being like, we came up with these when we were in our late 20s, early 30s, and The World's End definitely feels like, no, I'm in my late 30s, 40s now, and I'm dealing with very different problems. And I think that, yeah, there's moments in it, like I feel like the moment when they're in the shed on the Bowls Green, like it gets really intense, and I think that it manages to get really good performances out of the actors who are mostly known for comedy stuff. But then it keeps going back to the kind of the silliness of the alien invasion, which I think does have some thematic connections, and the kind of the idea of like certain parts of the town not growing up or being able to go back to your youth. You know, I can see the thematic lines there, but it almost could do better if it was just a purer like comedy drama about these guys reuniting in my brain. I'm not sure if it would work as well as a film, but I don't know. I'd be interested to see that version.
See, it's interesting. It's definitely his most mature film. I think a lot of the disappointment for me when I first watched it came from, I was expecting Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz, and I think it's a very brave decision in that actually this isn't a comedy, and you start realizing that it takes a little while for you to realize that, because I'm like, oh, this isn't funny, why am I not laughing? And then you kind of start realizing, oh, it's because I'm not supposed to be laughing. Like,
yeah,
I think you'll find it's listed as a comedy film on IMDb and Wikipedia.
It is,
so...
which is so weird, because it is a film about, like, Gary King is a tragic character. It is a film about an alcoholic who has tried to kill himself very recently and is running away from those problems, trying to recapture who he once was, whilst the world around him has moved on, and he cannot deal with that, and he's got no support network around him to deal with that, because he's pushed that support network away to tragic consequences. And that's the heart of the film. And I think the problem is that maybe this is a problem with the marketing around it, which is why it took me a good few watches to really enjoy it, was that I went in expecting a different movie and got that, and I was like, okay, I wasn't kind of emotionally ready for what I saw. I wasn't ready for that particular film. That being said, I think part of it is that I don't think it's entirely successful in some of those areas, because I do think it tries to push some comedic moments when perhaps if it went just, I'm going to make the drama part of this, and the comedy is going to come more from the characters or the misunderstandings as opposed to jokes. I think it does have some Edgar Wrighty things in it and some proper cornetto things in it. That it's got the wonderful foreshadowing throughout. Obviously, their journey as kids through the 12 pubs echoes their journey as adults. So it tells you the whole plot of the film at the very, very beginning, as we kind of discussed in Shaun of the Dead, as they do when they're outside the pub. I think that it's got a very, very good central performances again with everyone. I think I still can't 100% get on with Nick Frost in that movie. There's something about Nick Frost in that, again, that just holds me back from loving what he's doing in it. And I don't know, again, if that's probably on me, in that I'm expecting the Nick Frost that I know from other films, and this is a Nick Frost that's way more closed down, which is a super brave decision again by them to actually flip the roles, so that Simon Pegg's being the more outlandish one in this one. I think that's a really interesting way of playing it. But it just, there's something about it that I'm not clamoring to go back and watch it constantly. I think someone on the chat kind of said exactly the same thing as well, that if it's on, I'll watch it, sure, but I don't own it on DVD, and it's not available on streaming services. But I haven't.
From Andy there, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. But I haven't kind of gone back and gone like desperately out to watch it. It does, but it does have some great moments in it. I think that you mentioned the kind of bit in the shed is brilliant. The fight in the beehive is great, and I think I really enjoy the whole bit in the World's End. Like, I really enjoy the bit where they're in the pub at the World's End in the end. And I mentioned obviously earlier that "fuck off back to Legoland, you cunts" is it's great, and it is like properly in keeping with the characters. The fact that they've given the choice to these people who are both incredibly emotionally stunted people, and the choice whether to save the world or not falls to them. Well, of course they're going to be like, no, we're great, they're 12 pints in, and we're fucking brilliant, we're amazing, we can do it, we don't need you. And as a narrative arc, Gary King's arc does make sense, that he would rather see the entire world fall apart than have to deal with his own issues, which is kind of what he leads to the entire way through the film, and what he ultimately causes. So I do appreciate that, but the problem is with The World's End is that you kind of have to hold it up against Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. It is a film which, by its very nature, does not sit apart from those two films, and that is where it falls down. I think it's a solid kind of 3.5 star movie, but the other two are kind of 5-star films.
Yeah, I think it suffers so much from expectations and from comparisons.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's kind of not really a comedy, it's a tragedy, but with jokes in it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't quite hang together, even though there's great moments.
Yeah. Sorry, was
I
that a knock
wonder
at
how we're going to vote then?
Was that just checking? Was that a knock at somebody else's door? That wasn't me.
No, that's Emma
was you guys
in the kitchen. That's
right,
my partner.
Cool. No, that's fine. So I was just checking because my partner's supposed to be coming home, and I was like, "Did she forget her keys, or I just left her outside for her?"
Definitely on my end of things, mate. Don't worry.
Cool.
So, should we get to the vote then, gentlemen?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be fairly easy, I would think.
Yeah.
Reece, you're up first.
Shaun of the Dead.
I also agree, obviously. Shaun of the Dead. Tim?
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead.
Universal. Shaun of the Dead. Through to the next round. We get into something quite interesting, because I haven't seen one of these movies, so that's going to be interesting in and of itself. Let me get my Rotten Tomatoes up once again. We will be talking about, here we go, Hot Fuzz video. There we go. And Last Night in Soho. Last Night in Soho obviously came out literally a couple of weeks ago, hence why I haven't seen it. Still in cinemas. And Hot Fuzz, between, as we said, the other parts of the Cornetto trilogy. In 2007, Hot Fuzz is 2 hours and 1 minute long, with a 91% on the Tomatometer from 204 reviews and 89% on the audience score side of things, with over 250,000 ratings as well. Then we move over to, as I said, 2021's Last Night in Soho. 293 reviews have it at 75% on the Tomatometer and an 89% on the audience score side of things. So we've talked about the other two parts of the Cornetto trilogy.
Yep.
Let's talk about the middle bit. And I fucking love our wonderful collaborator, artist, friend, John Scarrett, has picked just one of the best cameos. I think I brought it up in our cameos episode. The wonderful, lovely Cate Blanchett there, star of Hot Fuzz, clearly. And I love Hot Fuzz. It's ridiculous. It's brilliant. It's one of the most English films ever made. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. But I spoke a lot on Shaun of the Dead. I'll let one of you guys, Tim, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on Hot Fuzz?
Yeah, I really love Hot Fuzz. It came out when I was in America, and my girlfriend at the time had seen it because it came out in Britain first, being a British film. And she came over, and when it was just coming out in America, and so we went to see it together, and she was like, just prepare for the power of Grayskull. I was like, okay. And yeah, I think it's so great in terms of like the pastiche of the Michael Bay, the sort of John McTiernan, the all those kind of action films. That's such a touch point for me when I was a kid, like, and a teenager growing up watching all those sort of films, and then to come to this that does them, but that channels them into such an English provincial landscape, and it's just it's the kind of thing that you so rarely see on the cinema, so, like, that part of Britain, like the fact that it's not in London, it makes it, to me is so interesting, it's a terrific film. I think that the jokes in it are so perfectly constructed. To me, like, Edgar Wright, and especially when he's collaborating with Simon Pegg, like, his films are like these intricate pieces of like clockwork. We talked a lot about how much he like foreshadows and stuff like that, and I think that Hot Fuzz is almost like the peak of that. Like, so much of it is things coming back and punchlines that pay off on stuff that's happened earlier in the film, that you've forgotten. You've had it happened like 45 minutes ago, and then it comes back, and you go like, oh yeah, that's her. And I think that's such a specific kind of filmmaking, and he does it so well. There's times when that can be a little bit cold emotionally, I think, because you just feel like the characters are part of this big machine that they have created. But equally, when you're making a comedy, it makes for such great gags. Hot Fuzz is so funny.
Yeah,
I agree. Getting a bit of a buzz from your end of things, Reece. There's a weird kind of like you're getting a bit of a Tim echo somewhere as well.
Oh,
if that's your. When you mute, it goes away. There's kind of like a really low rumble, kind of like a.
Oh, that might be my partner's just come back. That might be the light is on in the other room. So that might be a bit of a thing.
How sensitive is your microphone picking up a light in the other room? That's great.
It's got a fan attached to it as well. That might be the fan it's picking up.
Either that, or there's
not a huge amount. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any technical things going on.
No, everything's still plugged in. It looks like. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, it is absolutely hilarious. It's an ITV2 favourite. Obviously, it's always on TV. So I've probably seen it more than any of the other films on this list, because if it's on, I've seen it. Like, you just keep watching it, right? It is. I think next to Scott Pilgrim, the most quotable of his films. The amount of times I've seen like the chat here, like, the great big bushy beard. When everyone's got a beard they're growing, I always say great big bushy beard. That's
been referenced a few times in the chat already, of course.
Yeah. There's always the bit that I always reference as well, which is that whenever anything goes wrong, I don't say motherfuckers, I say mothers. Which is like the bit where he's running through. I find absolutely hilarious. I once went to see a play at uni that was done by one of the uni drama groups, that they did Romeo and Juliet, and I couldn't stop laughing through it because they kept using bits of They were very bad about using bits of music that were like almost like Homes Under the Hammer, that sort of referenced the exact thing that someone had said. For example, they did the Crucible and they kept playing like I Put a Spell on You and shit during the Crucible. You're like, this is not. But they did it during. Yeah, but they did it during Romeo and Juliet, and all I could think of was the bit in this where it's the love me, say at the very end of Romeo and Juliet, which is absolutely hilarious. Like everything, it all just works so well. Obviously, it's got Adam Buxton in it, and someone's referenced the Adam Buxton kill at the church, which is a fantastic kill because it just come out of nowhere, and it's so violent and so gross,
so gory, right?
It's so gory,
absolutely insane.
The Timothy Dalton is brilliant in it. It's also like a fantastic mystery. Like it's a hilarious mystery in that it wraps up and it's like, no, it's no big deal. It's like they just want to win Village of the Year, so they're getting rid of all these people.
Councillors, basically.
It's got some fantastic moments like those in it. I think like one of the things that I used to see a lot with Hot Fuzz was that everyone used to say the end kind of gets up itself a little bit when it goes through the ending. That the final action sequence is just about 20 minutes too long, which when I was younger I kind of agreed with it. Actually, the more I've watched it, the more I really enjoy every moment in that sequence. So I would find it hard to be like, oh, you've got to cut down the Summerfield bit a little bit, because actually the fight in the supermarket is fantastic. Forget that Olivia Colman in it being absolutely hilarious. Like the whole of that, the bit obviously with Rafe Spall and oh my god, I've forgotten his name.
Oh, Paddy Considine.
Paddy Considine. Yeah, where they kind of where they leave the frame. Which is brilliant, which you can see Paddy Considine starting to laugh as he does it.
You can.
Which is absolutely like stuff like that. It just feels like a film where everyone's firing on all cylinders. And from a storytelling perspective, from a visual storytelling perspective, I actually was referencing this last night. Actually, I was referencing this the other night in relation to talking to someone about Last Night in Soho. In that, there's the bit where Nicholas Angel is leaving London and going to the countryside, and it's done in very quick cuts with like the train and the plant, but keeps going back to his phone losing signal, which is a fantastic bit of visual storytelling because it tells me everything I need to know about how distant and how far away from the world he knows he is going, without me ever having to hear from anyone that's what's happening. I just know that by the time he gets to that village, he's in the middle of Fucksville, nowhere. Like, it's brilliant. I think it's great.
We talked about how quotable it is. Yarp and Narp are straight up in my vernacular at this point. I've replied to multiple texts per day with just YARP ... or NARP. Nobody bats an eyelid, and it's just like Yarp. Oh, are you up for coming over at 7? Yarp. Do you fancy jacket potatoes for tea? Yarp. Just like and it blew my mind when I was like, the Hound from Game of Thrones looks familiar. Where do I know? Oh my god, it's the Yarp guy from Hot Fuzz. That melted my brain. You mentioned Timothy Dalton earlier, like how brilliant Timothy Dalton is. Obviously, the painting of him and the smile has become a bit of a meme and stuff like that. And even the moment, like when he, again, spoilers for a nearly 15-year-old movie, when he's impaled at the end, and you're like, oh my god, he's dead. And then he's like, this really hurts.
Yes.
all the perfect like little subversions and stuff like that. You think it's all over, and it's like, no, there's still a couple more jokes left. Oh, it's so good, so good. And
the three-way conversation we didn't mention, by the way, that is that is just such a clever bit of comedy. That's great.
It respects the deadliness of swans, which always proud. They can break a man's arm.
And tell me that you like, I can't watch Point Break now without getting to that sequence, me picking up my remote and going. Every time I watch Point Break from now on, I just have to go like, have you ever shot your gun up in the air while screaming Sorry, I should also mention the other bit the other quote that we always do. It's like when everyone says, what do you want to do tonight? I was go, I don't know, pub. It's just it's my answer to saying pub. I have to do it in that voice with that motion.
Oh, so good. And yeah, there's maybe the most quotable for me in my just everyday life. There are so many quotes I do that people just completely ignore and just like, oh, it's just Jack doing he's doing a silly voice again. That fucking pain in the ass. Like, yeah, that's me. Like nobody tells me nothing and all that kind of stuff. Just, oh man, so good. Let's transition, shall we? And I'll hand over to you two. Reece, I'll let you kick off with your thoughts about Last Night in Soho.
So
I'm just going to pop and get a new drink. I'll be back in a moment.
Last Night in Soho is a difficult one to talk about without giving. I'm going to try very hard and give nothing away for it here. Visually, I think it's great. I think Last Night in Soho, for me, it didn't quite work. I think it really struggles. I just don't think the story quite holds together. I think it tries to do some really interesting stuff. And I think parts of it work really well, but honestly, from the beginning of the film onwards, the beginning of the film was very slow for an Edgar Wright film, and I think it's I know a lot of people said this. It's the least Edgar Wrighty of all the Edgar Wright films, and that kind of includes Sparks Brothers. Like it is the least Edgar Wrighty of all his films, but I found that my girlfriend and I had a big chat about this afterwards. The problem with Last Night in Soho is that I don't know what the danger is for Thomasin Cole's character. I don't know what the danger is for the lead character, and so it doesn't really have an element of danger. There's no real ticking clock for me. So I don't know if like people who don't know the story of it, it's that this young girl goes to London. Goes to fashion school, and when she's there, she kind of starts having these visions of this person who lived in Soho in the 60s. Now, the lead character is obsessed with the 60s, so she's thoroughly loving kind of being in the shoes of this person from the 1960s. And then as we start to learn more about this character from the 60s, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, we find out that all is not what it seems, and there is a much darker side of Soho and a much darker side of that 60s aesthetic that she starts to understand and be a part of. And for me, it just didn't quite hold up. I could see there were a few things coming at the end. I could see coming a mile off. I think it thought it was really clever, and I wanted it to be that clever, but it just didn't land for me. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited when I heard about it because the idea of him doing something that's much more horror tinged. Obviously, we talked about how at times Shaun of the Dead turns into kind of a real zombie film, but this is obviously a very different kind of horror. We recently watched Suspiria and its two sequels for the podcast, and Last Night in Soho is very giallo influenced. In a lot of its, the color, the constant like red and blue neon glare that is in certain scenes, and I think it's there's some interesting stuff in it, and there's some moments of great like visual imagination and some great sequences, but I agree with you. Like it feels slow to get started. It picks up once like you start getting the 60s flashbacks or dreams or whatever they are. It then feels like it gets to a bit where it's kind of sluggish in the middle, and it feels a little bit like it treads water for about 10-15 minutes. I think by the time it gets to the finale, I think even though that there are elements like you say that are kind of obvious a little bit from the beginning, it gets a couple of like decent sort of twists, reveals in there, and I think it, in terms of pacing, picks up a lot better towards the end. But yeah, I think it doesn't quite hang together as well as some of his other films. It doesn't feel, we said, like the kind of clockwork, meticulous nature. It feels like he's trying to move away from that. It feels like he's trying to move away from some of his like hallmarks. And, that's good. People should push themselves and try and do different stuff. But it feels like he's not quite as comfortable in this territory. And it's a slight misstep. It's still a good film, I think. It's still worth
Yeah.
seeing, but I think it's not as assured as some of his other stuff simply because he's trying new things. I think, it's certainly a couple of his best written women characters, probably because he worked with a female co-writer on this one. And I think he's one of many male filmmakers who don't deal with female characters that great. I always think it's hilarious that Christopher Nolan took that criticism on board and was like, okay, well, I'm going to make Dunkirk where it's completely justified that there's no female characters in it. And I think, good on him for working with a female co-writer, for trying to address that, recognizing that flaw in his sort of set of skills. I can imagine that if this is the stepping stone towards like a new stage in his career, I feel like if he continues that journey and is continuing to try and do something and kind of almost mature as a filmmaker, I feel like the next film that he makes will be better. I think he's doing the Running Man remake at the moment, which maybe feels like a then step backwards, but who knows? But yeah, I thought it was interesting. It had interesting moments. I think the two performances of Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy are great. I think it's got a pretty strong supporting cast. It felt very London in a good way. It felt like a real London for the most part, rather than Hollywood London. But yeah, I think it doesn't quite gel.
I appreciate a film that gets London geography correct, because that always annoys me, especially as I spend an awful lot of time in Soho. I appreciate a film that gets Soho geography correct, and so he's the person who knows that area very, very well, which is good. I just thought that there's moments in it. There's a whole thing with our lead character, with Thomasin McKenzie's character, where she has these sort of, whether they're visions or flashbacks. And one point that thoroughly annoyed us afterwards was there's a really interesting story there about what these are. How does she get them? Are they real? Are they not? Clearly, they are supposed to be real based on the way the film kind of moves. But why does she have them? What is about what causes them? Why does she have them? And I think there's elements there that just were never ever explored, which I was left thinking, there's a story in that's not, that you kind of left that and tried to do something else that didn't really work for me. I think it's a solid 3-star film, but I think no more than that, because it does fall down for me. And I kind of enjoyed it as I was watching it, and then when we left and we started talking about it, I was like, actually, that doesn't work and that doesn't work. And we kind of, my girlfriend and I both kind of came out feeling a little bit cold, which we didn't really want to. We went in hoping to love it, and I struggled to.
I think that element of like the kind of the where do these visions come from kind of thing, and also you mentioned like the idea of like what is the threat to her, they both feel like throwbacks to that older style of horror where like certain things don't need to be explained, and the threat is just kind of like, well, she'll just go mad, and that feels a little bit regressive, especially with a female character, of like, oh, she's hysterical. But I think that's kind of being a callback to those older type of horror films. And I think that maybe when he's a filmmaker who's so much of his stuff is so self-aware, like to kind of do those tropes without really examining them feels a little bit maybe lazy. And he's not normally a filmmaker who I would say that's a lazy filmmaker. So
it sounds like you guys have... Yeah, so it sounds like you guys, I can probably guess your votes anyway, but we did actually get Matt's picks beforehand, as you mentioned at the top of the show, Tim. I know a couple of people in the chat have been asking for it as well. So for the record, I will go back and then we'll come and kind of catch up with ourselves, if that makes sense, as what Matt would have voted for already. So if we go back to our first round of... He would, of course, agree with us. Sparks Brothers over Fistful of Fingers. Thank God. He also would agree with us. Scott Pilgrim over Baby Driver. Thank you very much, Matthew. Unsurprisingly, also would agree with us. Shaun of the Dead over The World's End. And his vote, I don't mean to influence you two, but I think from your conversation, I think I can kind of guess where we're going with this. He would pick Hot Fuzz over Last Night in Soho. Yeah. Tim and Reece, what do you think? From the conversation of us being, oh my god, I love Hot Fuzz, it's so many good, and you both going, I mean, Soho's fine, I guess. I think I'm getting a clear picture of where we're going here, but I'm guessing you guys are voting Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, I think this is the last one where it's of all. This is what we mean about I was saying at the beginning about the tier 1 and tier 2 Edgar Wright films. Is that the reason all of these votes have been unanimous? I think is that we've got rid of all of the ones that are divisive. I think from this point onwards, it's going to get a bit harder. Yeah. So for me, Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, Hot Fuzz here.
Fair enough. And I'll include Matt as my proxy there and go for Hot Fuzz. And there we go. Thank you, Kate Blanchett, in your mask. So we come back around. As I said,
we've done all the first round votes, so we should be speeding up now.
Let me zoom out and get a full picture here. So first round done. We're now on to what would be the semi-finals, and then we'll get to the finals, and then we'll have a winner. We've already talked about them. We're already on the Rotten Tomatoes, so we're going to get straight into a comparison and then a quick vote. Interesting comparison here. Two very different, but like we said, still very Edgar Wright films in Sparks Brothers versus Scott Pilgrim. Just for like I was saying before, going into it, thinking like, how is Edgar Wright going to do a documentary? How the fuck is that going to work? Weirdly enough, it's more similar. Like we talked about, like the animation elements and the kind of flashback scenes and stuff like that. Has oddly enough more of a connection with the visual effects style that he kind of, I guess, learned and worked with the team in Scott Pilgrim than you would think at first glance. So I think it's a really interesting comparison to have these two next to each other.
Yeah.
Despite them being obviously polar opposite styles of filmmaking, there is a weird kind of connective thread there for me as well, which I think is interesting.
I think it's really interesting actually how the categories have split up in that this left-hand side feels much more the Edgar Wright that uses music. Music, we've spoken about it a little bit, but music is and this is one of the things that I am heavily influenced by when it comes to Edgar Wright, is more so than the style of stuff, is the way he uses music throughout a film and writes to music and makes playlists of music that are like ingrained in the script almost before the film is even shot. And so having Baby Driver, Scott Pilgrim, Sparks Brothers all here is really interesting how this is split up. This almost feels like the music side of him, and the other side feels like the comedy side of him, and that's what we've obviously Last Night Soho apart. But yes, you can see the DNA of the same filmmaker, I think, between these two films. Absolutely, even though one's a documentary and one's a comedy action film, you can absolutely see the same DNA. I think the fact that he loves Sparks so much is also seen within Scott Pilgrim in the style of the music and the way the music is used, and the way the band kind of works. You'd be like, oh, I can see like how he's influenced by the style of Sparks potentially in the music that he loves, and the way the Sparks kind of present themselves. I can see that in Scott Pilgrim as well, actually, in many ways. I can see the same filmmaker. But yes, I think that I'd really see what he does with other documentaries, and if he does work on more documentaries. But as we've spoken about before, Sparks Brothers does have certain caveats to it that I think don't entirely work, whereas other elements of it are very good. Whereas for me, Scott Pilgrim is head and shoulders. Head and shoulders above it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good coverage of the connection and the differences between these films. Like that, you absolutely can feel, even though they're so different, you can feel that connective tissue and the passion for these stories, whether they are real stories or an adaptation. It's him. It's interesting because they are both him approaching a thing that isn't written by him, essentially. Even though obviously he worked heavily with Brian Lee O'Malley, and the comics were being written at the same time as the film and all that jazz. But it's him channeling that passion he has for something external to himself, which you could say for a lot of, it's Shaun of the Dead is him channeling zombie films, and Hot Fuzz is him channeling Michael Bay. But it's it's an interesting pairing. Shall we get to the voting?
shall we? It's back around to me, and because I'm ignoring that last vote, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna pick Scott Pilgrim just because it's been such a big part of my enjoyment and my love of it across various mediums, including the movie over the last 10 years or so. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I'm also going to go for Scott Pilgrim. I think Sparks Brothers is worth checking out. Like, I'm sure it will show up on streaming soon, and maybe split it into 2 sittings. But I would encourage people to check it out, especially if you haven't heard of Sparks. I think it's a fantastic introduction to them. But Scott Pilgrim is so
such a banger.
It's such a banger. Yeah, it's just it's a fucking banger. Tune.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
on the level
I
of
don't know these people.
On the level of tune, or tune, it's a tune.
Wow. Fucking hell.
I'm
watching the viewer numbers drop with you guys.
If people can't handle the truth, then what are you gonna do? I agree. Scott Pilgrim every day of the week. Again, completely agree with Tim. I definitely think people should watch Sparks Brothers. I think it's a really good documentary. I didn't know anything about them. If you like pop music, it's excellent. And Sparks Brothers did influence an awful lot of the pop music we know and love today. But I would absolutely check it out. But yes, Scott Pilgrim any day of the week.
So, a quick request before I click through: is Tim going to do a dab?
Maybe that'll be a Patreon goal.
Oh, dance lessons from Tim.
I had reason to ask a friend who works with like teenagers the other day. I was like, "Do kids still dab?" And she was like, "No one's dabbed for 2 years." I was like, "Okay, that's good."
That's good.
It came and went
TikTok
in Fortnite, and yeah, exactly, yeah. Moving over to a much. Oh, by the way, Matt also picked Scott Pilgrim for the record. From now on, I will include Matt's picks.
Right.
This is the one for me. This is the one I was dreading, and this is the one I had in my personal picks as well. Shaun of the Dead versus Hot Fuzz, Part 1 and Part 2 of the Cornetto trilogy. Oh, it's tough. It's tough. Reece, where are you leaning? How would you compare these two? All that kind of stuff.
It is tough, and I'm thinking about, like, of the two of them, which one more often than not would I rather sit down and watch, I guess.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well.
But then as I think about that, that's also difficult because honestly, for me, and I know that Hot Fuzz keeps getting everyone on the thread has been kind of saying Hot Fuzz throughout. I think I love Shaun of the Dead. I really think Shaun of the Dead's brilliant, and like I said, I do believe it to be one of the great, one of the best British comedies ever made. I think it just there's a lot of Hot Fuzz. I just think that it works on every single level. I think the issues with Hot Fuzz are I do think the end is slightly too long, and whilst it's all really fun and it is really funny, it does kind of have almost the Edgar Wright problem of the ending goes a little bit too crazy. He does that an awful. Actually, we didn't mention that last night at Soho, but again, I think it's that kind of Edgar Wright thing of the end goes so mental, and then it just sort of stops. And Hot Fuzz does do that. Whilst it's incredibly enjoyable to watch, and whilst I don't mind that at all, I think when Shaun of the Dead goes mental, I think it works from a character standpoint really, really well. I think the characters suffer more with that ending, and I think that works beautifully for a zombie film. The graph of it going from comedy to romance to actually like proper downer, to ending up being the wonderful moment of in the shed at the end where they're playing PlayStation, like all of that. I think it ends fantastically. So I would lean towards Shaun of the Dead. I mean, that's a controversial choice. I didn't think it would be, actually, and now I think it is, which is really odd.
We've got some votes in the chat for Shaun of the Dead as well. Personally, I choose Shaun of the Dead. Happy with either from Andy. So, Tim, how about you?
Yeah, it's a very interesting because they're in so many ways they're very similar, but there's also a lot of differences between them. Like like you said, Hot Fuzz, like the ending, once it starts kicking off with the action, and it's kind of in a way been that tension throughout the film of like waiting for that to happen is really interesting, and then it does go absolutely, balls to the wall. I think the moments that drag most for me is the start of that action sequence, and I think they almost kind of point a finger at that when they, like, another member of the Village Preservation Society or whatever it's called shows up, and I think Nick Frost's character goes like, "Oh, leave it out," and it's like, "Oh, fucking another one of these guys." And I think it's interesting because Shaun of the Dead, I think one of the criticisms you can level at it is that there's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina at the end, and as dark as it gets, it then kind of chucks that out, and Shaun just kind of gets rewarded and gets his girlfriend and gets his lovely life after that. But I think the emotional climax of Shaun of the Dead is better. That moment in the cellar.
I agree. Yep.
And I think, to me, like I mentioned, the slightly kind of mechanical storytelling of Hot Fuzz, and I think it's less of an emotional story than Shaun of the Dead. I know it's sort of trying to be about Nicholas Angel kind of opening up a little bit, and the building of his relationship with Danny, but I don't think that works quite as well as the character arcs in Shaun of the Dead. I think that's got more of a beating heart to it, funnily enough, for a zombie film. So yeah.
Fair. Reece, you touched on which one you'd like. If you had an option, which one would you watch right now, kind of thing. It's an interesting one from Andy here. If one has to be wiped from existence, which one would you keep? Which I think, not necessarily a different answer, but it's a very different question, right? Like thinking about, not which one have I watched the most or would like to watch again, but if the other one didn't exist, like, oh, how can I do that? I think that's interesting. I don't know if my answer would be any different, but I'll save that for the vote, obviously. We've got more votes for Hot Fuzz in the chat as well. And I think General Pandemonium touched on something I totally agree with, and something I've had this, how much I talked about Shaun of the Dead earlier kind of shows you how much I've talked with my mates and stuff about this. And this is a conversation that always comes up, is like, Hot Fuzz feels like an evolution in Edgar Wright's filmmaking from Shaun of the Dead. And it really has the weight of Wright being a more experienced director is a perfect way of putting it there. You really get a sense of he knows so much more about how filmmaking works and how better to use the team he's employing and working with, the cast, the crew, the visual effects, all this kind of stuff that all really gels together. And Shaun, in a weird way, feels like the evolution, as we said, from Fistful of Fingers. It still feels like a bunch of mates getting together and making a film, but on a much bigger budget. Whereas Hot Fuzz feels like a full kind of evolution to a great kind of, then the next step, I guess, in his filmmaking and stuff like that. Doesn't necessarily cue up what I'm going to pick, but maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We'll find out. And we're getting a little couple more things in here. Hot Fuzz feels a bit more generic than Shaun. Interesting. I can actually see what you kind of mean there. I mean, again, I think that ties into that. Shaun feels like a bit more of a bunch of mates getting together, a bit more of an indie film kind of vibe. Hot Fuzz is a lot more produced and kind of, I guess I can kind of see what you mean there. Interesting bit of trivia here from John as well. On the commentary with Edgar Wright and Quentin Tarantino, we learned that the two of them set up a table to sell DVDs of Point Break and Bad Boys 2 at the film premiere of Hot Fuzz, and literally could not give away the latter. Because Bad Boys is a big piece of shit.
Point Break is fucking great.
I think there's an interesting bit here. Dre Jones there says that Hot Fuzz has greater quotability. I think it does have greater quotability. I think it's got some fantastic quotes in it. We've obviously touched on an awful lot of them before. But Shaun does have moments which potentially aren't more quotable. Shaun feels more like spaced Edgar Wright making a film. Yes. And Hot Fuzz feels more like their filmmaker Edgar Wright making a film. That, for me, is the difference between the two of them. And I think that while Shaun of the Dead has fewer quotes in it, I think that something about the characters just flows so much more naturally. Maybe it's because I kind of know the characters from Spaced as well, but I think Simon Pegg is brilliant in it. I think he plays like that everyman so brilliantly throughout.
It's almost like the role Simon Pegg was born to play, and it almost feels like Spaced the movie in a lot of ways, doesn't it? Kind of that evolution there. Whereas kind of what we're talking about with Nick Frost in The World's End, having him kind of do something different, people's minds were blown when it was like, Simon Pegg is the action star badass super cop in this. You're like, Simon Pegg is a badass super cop. Are you sure? Like,
But and then said that the quotability, I would say that Sean does also have the quote of there's no I in team, but there is an I in pie, as in meat pie, which is an anagram of team. I don't know what he's talking about, which I love. I always that's a quote I always go back to an awful lot.
And brilliant reference here. You do notice that tires from Spaced is actually a zombie in Shaun of the Dead. I guess implying that they're in the same universe.
Yeah, you can see him. I think you can see him in the pub sequence, because I always look out. There's certain zombies I always look out for in the pub sequence.
Yeah.
I think there was more with him, but they you can still see him in a couple of scenes.
Yeah.
Shall we get to voting?
Let's go vote.
Yes, it's round to you first, Tim. I think.
God.
I think.
I
lose track.
This is a very tough one because they're both so good. But I'm gonna go with my heart and go with Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, Tim, you're gonna anger the chat. That's a bold choice. I respect it. Reece, how about you?
Yeah, it is hard, and it is hard, but I'm gonna go Shaun.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah.
Gonna blow everyone's mind here. It's a clean sweep for Shaun of the Dead, ladies and gentlemen. Something the chat are not going to be fucking happy about.
We're gonna piss some people off.
I know Matt. I believe would have gone Hot Fuzz in this.
Matt picked Hot Fuzz, correct? Yeah, you're right, Tim. And of course, Remy showing some love there for you. I knew I liked him for a reason. Setting the standard there for Shaun of the Dead.
When we were saying at the beginning what we thought the final was going to be, this is what I had as my final from the very beginning, was Scott Pilgrim versus Shaun of the Dead, and I knew that Shaun would be. I didn't realize how controversial Shaun would be as a pick, but
quite controversial. Never listening to another episode of Sequelisers ever again. We had John on our side, and for the first time ever on one of these live streams, I think Remy and I have agreed. So, you get Remy always loves Tim. But last time I think you tried to kick me off my own podcast, so
possibly, yeah.
They didn't pick the sequel. I mean, it's not technically a sequel, unless it's. And don't get us talking about thematic sequels. We've done an episode on that already. But yeah,
it is.
Finale
it is important to say that I do love Hot Fuzz and think it is a fantastic film. This is not a slight at all on Hot Fuzz.
We did spend 10 minutes talking about how much we love that film as well. It's not like, Hot Fuzz is a big piece of shit and we love Shaun of the Dead. But,
I mean, I think of all these films, I think the only one we probably would not recommend is Fistful of Fingers, which, as we said, is a 20-year-old student film.
And even then, feel free to go and watch it on YouTube.
It's an interesting archival piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is the finale. I think quite a lot of people predicted. We had some predictions earlier on. Most people did predict Pilgrim versus Fuzz, funnily enough, as their final. Yeah. But we've got Shaun versus Scott. It's very, very interesting. Going over to the chat. Shaun better win. Shaun over Scott. Shaun to win the whole thing. Either's fine. I pick Shaun over Scott any day of the week. Oh. Interesting. Hot Fuzz is a big pile of shit. Jack James 2020. Brilliant. Yeah, just edit that clip of me. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah.
Babylon 5's a big pile of shit.
Yeah.
Oh God. So Scott Pilgrim versus the World versus Shaun of the Dead. Very interesting. I think two of the more different of the ones we could have had in the finale, but
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Two of my favorite films of all time. Like I would say,
same. Yeah.
Probably both in my top 10.
Yeah.
And it is. I know, like I've obviously come dressed as Scott Pilgrim, kind of merchandise stand.
Reveal your chest tattoo.
Yeah. But this is, as I've been thinking about which of these I would pick for the whole week, and it does flip. It does flip. It does flip.
No pressure.
Yeah. No pressure. Because for these two, it's really hard as well for me to even go down to the sense of like, which do I have more of an emotional connection to? Because the answer is both. I have a real emotional connection to Scott Pilgrim. I watched it at a very specific time in my life where I obviously immersed myself in the world of Scott Pilgrim, and Scott was it's a film I've watched like tons of times. It was as I said before, it's what my girlfriend and I went to see on the first birthday I was with her. We went to the cinema to see it. We had that amazing experience in the cinema with it, and yet Shaun of the Dead is one of those films that probably is the reason I make films today. It's one of those films that I watched and went, oh, I didn't know you could do that with films. I didn't know they could be like this. Yeah. And suddenly I went to a screening of, again, I've had an amazing cinematic screening with Shaun of the Dead. I went to a screening a few years back that was Life is at the BFI, which was Life is Sweet, the Mike Leigh film, and Shaun of the Dead back to back, which was for Edgar Wright's birthday. He put on I think it was for Edgar Wright's birthday. He kind of put on a screening of those. Oh no, maybe it was the Edgar Wright's birthday one was something else. But he put on a screening of those two films, and then there was a Q&A with Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg afterwards, which was at the same time they were writing World's End, I think it was, because they were supposed to be over, but they couldn't make it because they were writing World's End in LA, so they did it over Zoom, and so that was an amazing experience of doing that. I have a fantastic experience with both of those films, and it's quite difficult to see Matt pop up in the chat.
Here he is. We knew he'd appear eventually. Sean doesn't even deserve to be in the final, let alone win. Wow. Yeah, as we said, Matt picked Hot Fuzz over Shaun of the Dead. So yeah, there you go. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
It's hard. I've had some wonderful experiences with like Edgar Wright cinematically in that sense. But yeah, it's hard. What do you guys think?
Yeah. I think Sean needs to win just to piss off Stockton. Oh dear, yeah. Please do send Matt some love in the chat. I'm sure you guys will. But yeah, welcome your controversial opinions, Matthew. But we don't have to listen to you for once. So
and we've still gone on for 2.5 hours.
Exactly.
It's so hard because they're so. Yeah, I just to echo what Reece said, I have emotional connections to both of these films. They both are kind of they show off a lot of the things that Edgar Wright does so well. They're so well edited. The use of music is great. I think that as much as Shaun of the Dead is an amazing British film, I've heard many people praising Scott Pilgrim for being a very good Canadian film.
Yeah, true.
And showing off, elements of Toronto and stuff like that, which is often not quite as much as Vancouver, but like is shot a lot and pretending to be New York and stuff like that, and to have it actually be Toronto on film. Oh God, it's a really, really hard decision because they are both really good. Jack, what are your feelings?
It's incredibly tough. Reece pretty much summed up my feelings. They're both in my top 10 films of all time. Like two of the films I've watched again and again more than almost any other film in existence. Like I said, Shaun of the Dead might be my most watched film I've ever watched, kind of thing, just because I had that period where we would watch it back to back with different commentaries and all that kind of stuff as a teenager. And Scott Pilgrim, I find it so watchable and so entertaining and so easy to just jump in and be like, oh yeah, just put it on in the background, or if I really want to just chill out and do something else. If I'm writing a pitch and I need to put something on the background, Scott Pilgrim is just so entertaining. There are moments where I'll be like, oh, I need to watch that bit. Hold on. Come back to it again. But yeah, they are both so entertaining, so watchable, so rewatchable for me. And yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. It's all kicking off in the chat, by the way.
Yeah.
People catching up on YouTube. You are not here for it live, but yeah, lots of love being shown to Matt, of course. Get well soon, Matt. Get well soon, Matt. Hope you feel better soon, Matt. Some hearts in the chat there as well. And then, of course, rest in peace, Doctor. So yeah, Reece, it's over to you first.
Yeah.
Oh God,
you unlucky bastard! Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Can't
What a lovely
beat
guest
around
you've
the
been.
bush any longer.
Good luck.
No. So yes, this decision comes down to which I think. So I've had this discussion with a friend of mine and Tim's, Alex, a couple of weeks ago. We had this discussion of what's a good film and what's your favorite film. Like, oh, I think that's a great film, but actually that's my favorite film. And it's really. And he was like, no, if it's your favorite film, then it's a great film, and it's those things. So
We've talked about that on the show before as well.
Yeah, and
sure.
It's like that notion of guilty pleasures. Well, nothing. If it's a pleasure, then it's a pleasure. There's nothing guilty about it. And I know Scott Pilgrim comes under that kind of guilty pleasure because it does have problems. But I think if I'm going down to looking at these, because emotionally and nostalgically, these two are on a level for me. So I have to go down to which of these films do I think is the better told story and the better made film. And I think the better told story is Shaun of the Dead. So that's why I'm going for Shaun.
Oh, Shaun of the Dead vote from Reece there. Interesting comment from John before I give my... If the shitty Yank boyfriend wins, we write. Well, I write. He's Canadian, John. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. That's the whole point of that movie. Oh, God. I know we always say, like, oh, being worst is really bad and being the last is really bad. Being second is bad, too, in these votes. Because do I decide it now or do I create the split and then force Tim to decide it? I don't know. Oh, God. More votes for Shaun. Just chanting Shaun in the chat there as well. Fucking hell. Oh no, what do I do? I don't know. I'm gonna have to pull the trigger. I will say I'll go Scott Pilgrim. It's up to you, Tim.
Coward.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I chickened out that one.
I'll pull the trigger by sitting on the fence.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yes, exactly. Tim.
I
didn't want to leave you out the final two, you know. But
no,
nice
fair.
Also a coward.
It's an incredibly hard decision. Matt's just popped up again to say Scott Pilgrim required 5 times the filmmaking to get made. I think that's probably true. I think it's
yeah.
ambitious.
We're not judging what was the most effort to make the film. That's not the competition here, Matthew.
Yeah. So by the way, but when I said that, Matt, as well about the idea that I think Scott Pilgrim. Shaun is the better made film. I'd say that from the perspective of what we said earlier about I think Scott Pilgrim is a bit rushed in the middle, and I think because it's trying to tell a story that takes place over months in 3 days, I think the character bits in the middle don't quite have the emotional impact it does, and I think Shaun does a very good job of building the characters until it becomes the ending. So by the end, I'm very involved in who they are, and whilst I am in Scott as well, that's just because I just kind of love the characters. So yeah.
You know, I really love Shaun of the Dead for representing
confirmation there from Matthew there.
Representing a side of Britain that is not seen, especially at the time when it felt like fucking the only version of Britain on cinema was Richard Curtis. And Shaun of the Dead is, apart from being extraordinarily white as well, is about as far as you can get from that. I'm going to come down. I'm going to use the Andy Steen trademark method of which film if one has to vanish from existence,
That one? Sean.
a bit further up.
Okay.
If one film has to vanish from existence, like which film do you keep?
The existence question. There you go.
Exactly. And I think at the end of the day, if Scott Pilgrim doesn't exist, then you still have the graphic novels. Whereas if Shaun of the Dead doesn't exist, you might not have the rest of Edgar Wright's filmmaking career. He might have stayed just doing TV. So I am going to go with Shaun of the Dead.
Holy shit.
Matt
Ladies and gentlemen,
not
it's
happy.
official. A lot of the chat are not going to be happy. Matt's not going to be happy. But fuck him, am I right, guys? It's official. So I don't get full
It's
screen.
a very, very close run thing.
Oh.
Yeah, oh yeah. Like look, the difference between Shaun of the Dead, Scott Pilgrim, and Hot Fuzz for me is negligible. Like it really is like a tiny. I would happily sit down and watch any single one of them any day of the week. And Scott Pilgrim is a film that it lives within my brain on a constant cycle. But yeah, there's something about Shaun. I just think it's great.
You're getting a lot of love in the chat there, Tim, from the Shaun defenders. No Shaun means no cinematic Edgar Wright. I mean, good. Wow. Great quote
we
here
missed
from
out on
General
some
Pandemonium as well.
very salty Matt commentary.
We did.
Time.
Yeah. I'm shocked and appalled that a film I love slightly less than the other two films didn't win. Pretty much. Yeah, Matt's not happy. But he's not here, so fuck him.
But he's not here, so fuck him.
Salt. Separate comments there from Stockton. And there we have it. We have Shaun of the Dead as our official winner. It goes on to the Champion of Champions, whatever the hell we end up doing with that. At the end of when we have enough directors to compile another bracket of all of those things. Yep. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be tough.
I think we're about 3/4 of the way now. So
we are, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Toothless. Toothless isn't happy either. She's shouting as well. But before we go and say goodnight to the lovely ladies and gentlemen in the chat and everyone watching on YouTube, Reece, how can people find you, follow your escapades in filmmaking and all that good stuff?
So I am at Reece Lipman on Twitter, where I tweet about... sorry, I just read Matt's comment there. Where I tweet about films I'm making and also other stuff that's going on with me at the moment. I'm also at Reece Lipman Film on Instagram, which is you can see all of the film posters and awards and stuff that my films are doing and things that I'm doing for work. And then also I am reecelipman.com, where you can see various different films I've made, music videos, short videos, and also you can read about Ice Cream and Donuts, which is my latest short film, which, as I said before, is still streaming on the Nottingham Film Festival, Norwich Film Festival website until Tuesday, I believe. So if you want to have a watch of that, please feel free to check it out.
The multi-award-winning Ice Cream and Donuts.
Yes, we've won 3 awards now, which is very, very nice. It's very nice to hear.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Of course, if you'd like to follow us, we are Sequelisers and everything. You can find everything, all the information by going, you can see the little thing down the bottom right there, sequelisers.com. If you want to support us on Patreon, it's patreon.com/sequelisers. If you want to follow me, I am, of course, JLW Chambers. Tim, what are you? It says it on the screen.
It says it on the screen, at Trivia Lad. Matt, our missing member, he's at Stogs.
He is. I've still got him on there. Still a tribute to Matt. We said fuck him about 10 seconds ago. It's like, show him some love, but also fuck him.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that was a very, very tight competition.
It was tough. It was tough. But well done, Shaun of the Dead. Reece, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday evening to come and join us here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Like I said, all the links for all the stuff we've mentioned will be in the video description once this live stream is finished and it goes to YouTube processing and all that kind of stuff. So if you do want a quick link to Reece's website or anything like that, have a look in the video description. It's all there for you, lovely folks. We'll be back next month, which, by the way, is fucking Christmas. So a little Christmassy surprise for us coming in December. I think so. Hopefully, Matt, I'll be feeling better by then. We'll be back next month with, another live stream. And, of course, the usual podcast stuff happening every week. We're about to wrap up the final couple of episodes of the season. So be prepared for the big Season 9 finale towards the end of the year as well. And, there'll be a Christmas special for the live streams towards the end of the year. So have fun with that. Last question before we go, Tim. Wait. Is Tim wearing a dressing gown?
No, I'm wearing a very stylish cardigan.
Lovely.
It's my dinner with Andre cardigan.
Lovely. And on that note, thank you very much for viewing.
My dinner with Andre cardigan.
There you go. My dinner. There we go. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. We very much appreciate it, and we will see you next month. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.